This is Spirit Gym. Today, Paul is talking with Daniel Solomons, the CEO and co-founder of Update, the world's first caffeine-free energy drink, as well as Shawn Wells, the expert formulation scientist behind Update, as well as the creator of over 1,100 other products. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast.
1, 2, 3, lift off! Well, as you heard from Penny's introduction, I'm with two very interesting and highly intelligent gentlemen today. I hope you enjoy our deep dialogue on Beyond Caffeine. Today, we're going to talk about Update and the paraxanthine molecule and much more. But before we get started, I want to tell you about why I wanted to do this podcast with Shawn and Daniel. And that is this. I was fairly recently in Austin, Texas, to do a round of podcasts with some of my favorite people in the world over there. And my first stop was Cal Callahan's Unlearn podcast, great podcast, by the way. And Penny and I had just got there. I left home exhausted from, endless work on Spirit Gym and all the things I'm involved in. Got there, was jet lagged, and showed up to do the podcast with Cal. And he handed me a can with big capital letters Update on it. And I'm like, oh, what's that? He said, give this a try. You're going to love it. We sat down to do the podcast, and I had the usual kind of jet lag, not enough sleep, kind of empty head, and just felt tired, from working so much and traveling. And I probably didn't get more than about 4 sips of Update into me. I would imagine it was about 3 or 4 minutes, and I began to feel like a smooth lift of energy, and my tired head cleared right up. And I said to Cal, what in the world is this stuff? Because this is wild. And unlike caffeine, it did not give me any jitters or buzzes or sympathetic reaction. I just felt really centered. The way I would describe it is it felt like all my chakras aligned and everything was just like I'd done about 30 minutes of Tai Chi. And so naturally I became very, very interested. And by the time Cal and I finished the podcast, I started asking him a lot of questions. And lo and behold, I ended up at Luke Story's place to do a podcast, and he handed me a can of Update, and he told me, about his involvement in Update and why he loves it. And so it seemed like all of a sudden, everywhere I went, people were handing me cans of Update.
Josh Trent.
Yeah. Then Josh, Josh and I did a killer podcast together on his Wisdom and Wellness show, which is awesome. So if you enjoy a good deep dialogue, that's one for you too. And so Josh had it, and he loves it. And so I'm like, wow, Austin's way ahead of everybody else. Like, they got all this stuff I don't even know about. And so when I started investigating what it was that was making Update have that effect on me and give me the kind of the joys of a nice espresso, but without any of the negative side effects, I started learning a lot of interesting things, which led me to Daniel and Shawn. So today we're going to have an amazing exploration, because I really think that everyone should know about Update for all the reasons we're going to get into. But you all know that caffeine is a double-edged sword. It can, help you, but it can also cause a lot of problems. And so Update resolves all those problems. So to begin with, what I've asked Daniel and Shawn to do is just share a little biographical overview of who they are and how they came to develop the skills, because these are very unique, interesting men. And I love sharing intelligent people on the podcast, and they're both very unique and different in their backgrounds and in their expertise. So whichever one of you would like to start first, why don't you share with us how you came to be smart enough and capable enough of creating something as wild and interesting as Update?
Yeah, I'm Shawn Wells, and I'm living in Austin currently. I was in Dallas prior. For me, how I got here was I had a very difficult, traumatic childhood that led to pretty severe depression, morbid obesity.
Wow, well, you've done well.
Yeah, thank you. And there was a lot of trauma that ended up working its way into my health and physiology. That became Epstein-Barr syndrome,
Ooh, that's a
fibromyalgia,
bummer. Both of
chronic,
them.
chronic fatigue, Hashimoto's, brain tumors.
Wow.
Yeah, I went through a lot of serious health stuff. At one point, I was in bed for about 6 months and couldn't get out of bed. Hypertonic muscles, just I was really on the edge of death, I think mentally and physically. I was working probably 80 plus hours a week and just not in a good place health wise. And but all of this led me to become deeply passionate about finding a way out, and that led me to the ketogenic diet, fasting, paleo, as well as a number of supplemental strategies, and that led me to getting my master's in nutrition and biochemistry, becoming a registered dietitian, certified sports nutritionist. I'm now a fellow in the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and it led me down a path of one, becoming a chief clinical dietitian, and I worked 10 years clinically, but then also becoming a biochemist and working on unique chemicals. I've patented about 40 unique ingredients and formulated over 1,000 supplements.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and I wrote a book called The Energy Formula that is a biohacking book that talks about human optimization also deeply through mindset, as well as the supplements. And I think it was about, almost 5 years ago to the day that I did my first psychedelic experience. And that led me down a very powerful path, because up until that point, all the biohacks were really about me just hanging on, like how to hack my body and hang on through all of the imposter syndrome, ultra vigilance, and being in sympathetic nervous system 24/7, like how to hang on through all that. And I believe that I was on the edge of death, either intentionally committing suicide or unintentionally committing suicide through all my work. And that was a massive shift in everything when I did a psilocybin experience. And since then, I've done a lot of work in psychedelics, spoke all around the world on psychedelics, as well as the biohacking and supplements. And that's become a big part of my platform. I'm here today because of that, and I know you're a big believer in the power of entheogens.
Yes. Very healing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's led me into now being more about optimization over just the biohacks, so to speak. And now that's, just a huge passion of mine. And now I have true purpose in bringing these ingredients and formulations to people all around the world and hopefully making them healthier.
I think that's fantastic. I often tell people I've learned more through my plant medicine ceremonies than I have from all the books in this library. And people look at me kind of stunned, and I'm like, it's true. But I use plant medicines to do deep spiritual explorations and to enhance connection to different levels of intelligence throughout the cosmos and within the psyche, and a lot of amazing things you can do if you know how to use them properly. And that's one of the reasons I've used them in my healing practice for so long, because I've seen people go from the kind of state you were in, and within a year of good coaching and the use of plant medicines, it's like they've completely been reborn.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be with a bunch of religious baggage. It can be the literal second coming of Christ within the individual, but without a bunch of dogma attached to it. And I think that's something that's important in our time. So great story. It was fascinating for me to hear that because I didn't even realize all that stuff. I'm hanging out with you not knowing this history, but now it puts a lot more perspective into why you do what you do. Daniel, I want to hear your story too, because you're an interesting cat for sure.
Sure. I'm Daniel Solomons from Sydney, Australia. So shout out to all your Australian
We have
listeners.
a lot of Aussie listeners. Go Aussies, I love you.
Oi, oi, oi.
Yeah, my story is maybe not as colorful as Shawn's, but I
You
grew
mean
up
it's
in
painful.
or that. I grew up in Sydney, Australia. Did your traditional, finished high school, went into university, studied business, went into investment banking for several years, and got to the point where what I was doing every day was just the same thing over and over again. I loved the people I was working with, but at the end of the day, the learning curve just was no longer exponential. Unlike in the US, in Australia, you don't normally travel as much for college. So I did university staying at home, hadn't had that experience of living overseas. So after, going into banking for about 5 years, decided one day, hey, I'm going to resign from work, and 6 months later, book a one-way ticket to New York. Thought process at the time was I had saved up enough money to go to New York and have fun for a year. If it turned out that I enjoyed it, I would have to work out how to fund my lifestyle and sustain that. So very quickly after moving to New York, realized, this was the place I wanted to spend several years. It was a lot of fun. I had lots of friends in the city. Just being immersed in the culture, particularly the startup culture, and that kind of grind was really exciting at the time. And shortly thereafter decided I want to start a business instead of going to work for another corporation. At the time in New York in particular, amongst the circles I was in, I was exposed a lot to several startups. People around me were starting companies left, right, and center. What seemed like something in Australia that was incredibly challenging to do, and not many people I knew did that or took those risks, all of a sudden was incredibly accessible in New York. And that's where, we started, my business partners and I really started coming up with the idea for Update and what it is today.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I was kind of listening and had a little smile, and I was going to say, Shawn, you can tell how old he is because he was excited about the grind. Mm-hmm. You know that you're aging when the grind isn't so exciting anymore. You're like, okay, how do we get more efficient at this and avoid the grind? But congratulations, the grind is important. The secret to the grind is learning to be more efficient and more effective as you go so that you don't make the same mistakes over and over again, which some people take a long time to learn. But the concept of Update is very, very unique. I loved when you told me the story about how you were trying all sorts of stuff and you were kitchen sinking it, and it was getting you a little ways down the line, but not very far. So I'd love to hear what inspired you, first of all, to even enter the energy drink market, which is really the kind of classification that Update's in, although it's much more than that, as we'll get into. And tell us about the process and what ultimately led you to Shawn, because you guys are, worlds apart, yet here you are together.
Well, I mean, the grind has something to do with it. I think you get to New York, you get really into this grind state, and quickly thereafter you realize, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. So that definitely plays a role into Update, and caffeine definitely plays a role into the, that hustle culture, that grind culture that we all grew up in. Moving to New York and being amongst the startup culture, one thing that was really exciting to me at the time was beverages. Used to walk through a supermarket and you would have Coca-Cola products and Pepsi products and Schweppes products. That was basically it. Everything was just sugar in a can or sugar in a bottle. But now all of a sudden, 5 years ago, you have, you walk into your local deli and it's a rainbow of products on the shelf. Everything from your, Coke and Pepsi now take up the smallest part of the shelf, and the rest is all innovation. Yeah. Functional beverages were all the thing. What got us really excited about energy drinks was it's the fastest growing category in non-alcoholic beverage. Everyone in the world needs energy, right? 90% of people are consuming caffeine on a daily basis. Of that group, I would encourage, all the listeners, turn to the person next to them and ask them how much caffeine they drink, and you're going to get some sheepish response. There's very few people who are really confident in the, quantity of caffeine they drink. They're normally quite embarrassed by how much they consume.
1 espresso for me, that's it.
There you go.
Threshold.
And, you kind of take all these data points into consideration, and there's you look at what the energy drink market is today, and it's really the exact same product that feeds into this caffeine addiction, which is energy drinks equal caffeine and sugar, and sucralose nowadays. And your energy drink is designed to do one thing, and that is to wake you the hell up and overstimulate you. And no one really considers the cost at which they come at, i.e. the crash, the jitters, the increase in heart rate and anxiety, all of that fun stuff.
Well, another thing people don't talk about, and Shawn will know about this, but one thing I've studied is what is called nutrition blockers. I have books in my library here that will list all the things. For example, if you take caffeine while you're eating, it'll tell you exactly what minerals, trace minerals, vitamins, etc. it'll block, so you can't absorb it. And when you look at the fact that you're dealing with processed sugar in large quantities, which is as addictive as heroin or morphine, according to Candace Pert, who is a biochemist. She says that white sugar should be classified as a class 1 drug because of this level of addiction and the negative effects it has. And so you got all this white sugar. You've got usually, which is very low quality, cheap tap water, which has all sorts of crap in it from fluoridation and everything else, chlorine. And then you've got the caffeine. So the point I'm making here is that what people often aren't aware of is that in nature, if you eat a calorie of food, it comes with a quantity of nutrition. So according to John Berardi, who is a PhD nutritionist, it takes 52% of the calories that you eat to run a food from mouth to anus. So when you actually do the math on how much energy, that's just the energy, and then how much resources it takes just to run the factory, we'll call it, of the body, the digestive metabolism, assimilation, and elimination process, the more of these types of drinks you consume, the further you go into a nutritional deficit, because not only are you dealing it just with a nutrition energy balance, but you're dealing with the fact that these things are overstimulating the sympathetic nervous system. So think of it like an engine at idle. But if you drink caffeine, the RPM goes up significantly, which is why people jitter and sweat. And so then what happens is you eventually start resetting your adrenals so that they're getting pushed harder and harder and harder, and eventually it burns the whole system out, and you end up with things like chronic conditions, fibromyalgia, global pain syndromes, can't think straight, and eventually that leads to hypothyroidism. And I've had countless cases of people that were nutritionally just wiped out, and in phase 3 adrenal burnout, which is the final phase of burnout, but that usually ushers in hypothyroidism. So the point I'm making at the outset in this regard is that what very few people look at, and this is important because the amount of these energy drinks being consumed today, and soda pops and shit like that, is through the roof. And so what we've got actually is a nutritional vacuum and a life force energy vacuum. And as they keep upregulating and stimulating, the amount of the drug that it takes, sugar and caffeine, to bring them up to what they would sense as their baseline gets higher and higher and higher until the system just crashes.
Yeah, I think it's a real come at a cost ingredient.
Both of them, sugar and caffeine.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's what we've been trained to believe an energy drink is and has to be. And it certainly doesn't serve its purpose in, I think, the society or the way in which a person wants to live and feel. I think, there's something really beautiful in the ability to focus and be productive. And I think, what the energy drinks of today really do is overfuel you so you can't be focused and productive. they do come at that cost. And I think we were trying to find a way in which we could create something that served the purpose to give you the energy you want, but really the right energy and not more energy for the sake of it. At the time, I never drunk energy drinks besides a Red Bull at a nightclub a decade ago, right? No part of these products were attractive to me. But if we could come up with a way to give you the utility you actually want without those harmful side effects, then we were designing a product first and foremost for ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's how a lot of good products start.
Part of that was also having been someone from Australia who was used to drinking so much coffee, given our coffee culture. Really, when it came to that like afternoon cups of coffee, one, not feeling well, in terms of stomach feelings, two, not being able to sleep well, right? But you were so used to having several cups of coffee a day. So if there was a way to come up with a solution that allowed me to get that pickup in a sustainable way, for me, it was particularly important, around lunchtime and in the afternoon, but without coming at that cost, we thought we would have a really interesting product. That led to going down a rabbit hole of how the hell do you create this? Mm-hmm. At the time, nootropics and ingredients and supplements, none of this stuff was familiar to me. I didn't have the formulation background that Shawn has, or the science background. So I started looking at all the different nootropic products on the market. I built, a matrix of, what are the most popular ingredients that people are talking about and for the, purpose of energy and focus. And I start going on, Amazon and buying all these ingredients in powder form. I bought some science gear in my kitchen in my, small apartment in New York City. Figured, it's got to look the part if I'm going to try an experiment. And I started, weighing out different ingredients and making my own concoctions and, flinging it out to friends and seeing what people thought. And pretty quickly realizing I'm not getting anywhere.
Did your friends die off or?
Well, maybe that was it, or I got no feedback from them. But the challenge I kept running into was, maybe occasionally this dose of nootropic ingredient made me feel focused. But then when I tried it the next day, it didn't really do anything. Or if I gave it to my friend, it didn't do anything. And later on through Shawn, I learned about bioindividuality and how certain ingredients and compounds affect people differently. Yeah. But at the time, I didn't know that. And so what we ended up doing was saying, okay, well, I'm not the scientist here. What's a way to make this work without myself? And that was to find the number one ingredient scientist in the country. And so I went down a rabbit hole, and someone called Shawn Wells kept popping up, left, right, and center through all various people who I respected as thought leaders in the supplement and biohacking space. Mm-hmm. And so I reached out to Shawn and proposed, the idea of Update to him, which was, we want to create an energy drink. Paraxanthine, which we'll talk about later, which is our key ingredient, wasn't a known ingredient at the time. So that wasn't even part of our dialogue, but I said to Shawn, we want to create this energy drink where we can help people really harness their focus, harness their energy, bypass all the overstimulation and just get pure clarity. And so to do that, we don't want to use caffeine. We also don't want to use sugar. We don't want to use chemical sweeteners like sucralose or aspartame. We want this to be a product for us that we would want to drink. Can you help us out? And that led to, a 5-year marriage so far together since that first conversation.
Wow, I didn't realize it's been that long.
Yeah, lots of R&D into working out how to build a product around this new ingredient and bring that to market has gone into this.
One of the things I wanted to share, which I know both of you know, but for the audience, because I'm fairly well known in all aspects of health and performance, and I have a successful podcast, I get nootropic stuff sent to me all the time in the mail. I mean, from companies all over the world. In fact, the table as you walk into Penny's office is sometimes overflowing with boxes, and I sometimes just cannot get through all the stuff. And I've probably tested, I would imagine, 12 or 15 or more things that people sent me, but every single one of them made me just feel like combination of being poison and electrically overstimulated. Sometimes I can even feel my nervous system almost buzzing like an electric fence, and it's very uncomfortable, and I can feel this sense of like my body's rejecting the stuff. And I'll even be careful that, like, if it's a pill form, I'll just take the lowest dose, 1 cap or whatever. And I'm like, how in the world do they make money off of this stuff? Because I'm a healthy guy, and I imagine a lot of people just don't feel what it's doing to them, but the amount of money it costs to develop, market, package, and distribute this stuff is significant, so they can't stay in business unless they're selling a lot of it. And it just makes me realize that people are in such a state of imbalance that when they're buying this stuff, they think it's improving them. But it's kind of like if you feed white rice to someone who's a starving beggar, it's a nutritional upgrade to eating out of garbage cans. Right. So I think we've just got a case of people all around the world that are so detached from what it feels like to be healthy and eat real food and drink clean water that these things somehow survive. And you know, one of the first questions I had, I can't remember which of you I asked it to, is what's the water source? Because most of these drinks out there are just using tap water. And you guys, if I remember right, told me you're using a high-quality spring water. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's all. Shawn knows the filter type, but it comes from high-quality spring water, a local source in Middlebury, Vermont, which is where we manufacture the product.
Yeah, great, because water's the main ingredient there. I mean, as far as volume goes, and it's the main ingredient in the human body. We're 99.99 something percent water by molecular count. So I think because water is such a very, very important catalyst for chemical reactions and for connection within the body and electrical flow, if you're going to make a drink that's water-based, it should be good water. I think that's very, very seldomly thought of.
I think one of the things that went into building Update, kind of an ethos that we shared and really that I think Shawn resonated with, and that was one of the hurdles that, because we were doing this, was one of the reasons Shawn wanted to work with us as well, is we would only use ingredients, at their efficacious dose, highest quality ingredients sourced from the best manufacturers or suppliers, and we wouldn't put ingredients into the product that didn't need to be there or that were feather dusted in to say we have it. And one of the things I learned through this kind of early research and development phase before Shawn joined the picture, looking at all these other energy drinks or nootropic drinks or products that say they have this ingredient and that ingredient, most of the time they're feather dusting, kind of, i.e. putting very small amounts of the active ingredient in there, but just to say they have it. And then, gets to that bio-individuality question where it's like, you felt this, but I didn't feel anything. And so then, the companies overcompensate by putting in caffeine because that works universally for everyone. And so that was one of our key things. We wanted to make sure whatever went into this product was there and had a purpose to be there.
Yeah, one of the things, too, I know Shawn will be familiar with this, but one of the things very few people are aware of, often our culture is a calorie counting culture and an amount observing culture, right? Everything's about, more is better. But when you're formulating something like an energy drink or any kind of nutritional product, there are many molecules that are synergistic with other molecules, and having lots of them doesn't mean it's better. Sometimes a small amount is actually far more effective because of the combining and interacting effects, the synergistic effects. And I think that's one of the mistakes that Western people make, is they look at everything for volume. It's how much of this has it got, and of course there's a tendency by companies to make certain molecules famous, like, this is the greatest thing, and so the next thing you know, people are doing loads and loads of it, but don't realize that it's actually not better at all. It could be worse and more stressful on your body. You got to Shawn, and then Shawn, you've got quite an interesting story about, because ultimately what it was that blew my mind, in our conversations, you guys explained to me it's the paraxanthine in there, which I had never heard of. And so honestly, it was quite a shocking experience for me, because in the past, when I felt like I did when I arrived in Texas, it would have been straight to an espresso shop because that was the best solution I had, which, as you guys know, I updated by adding butter to coffee because it acted for, I was doing a lot of research because I had so many of my patients, especially females, would not eat breakfast, but they would drink, 2 to 5 cups of coffee before 10 o'clock. And so I had this really consistent theme of people having very severe blood sugar handling problems. And as you know, caffeine will bring your blood sugar right up. It'll stimulate you. And people are adding sugar to it. And a lot of them are not even adding milk. And if they are adding anything, it's usually some bogus chemical like some creamer that's just crap for the body. For me, I thought, okay, I know I'm not going to get these people off of caffeine too quick because I have to work on their diet and their lifestyle, which means I have to work on their mindset, their belief systems. I have to help them set healthy rituals. So I was like, okay, I got to figure out a way to stabilize people's blood sugar. And I had been studying chelation at the time. And so I thought, well, what can I do to chelate the caffeine? And so I thought, well, if I can get a fat source in there, it'll tie the caffeine up, and then they'll actually be getting fat with their coffee. So I started experimenting with butter, with all different kinds of nut oils. I mean, I got oils of every type I could from an organic supplier. The problem was the oils kept floating on top of the coffee, so it didn't micelize, didn't mix in, but butter would. And so... And I'm dairy intolerant, but butter doesn't bother me because there's not enough protein in it to really activate the immune system. So that was sort of me trying to do in my own way what you've done a million times better with Update. Because still drinking the espresso has all the problems with caffeine in it. The butter helps. It stabilizes, has a lot of benefits, but you still can get very dried out from it. You can get all the negative effects of the caffeine. But the experience of Update is like in a completely different league altogether from the experience of caffeine. And I said to Cal, whoever makes this stuff, I got to talk to these guys because I want to know how the hell they did this. So I'd love, Shawn, for you to share, because you're familiar with everything I'm talking about. So I think both of you guys know exactly why I'm making the points I'm making. But I think the history of how you figured this whole paraxanthine issue out and how you knew about it from prior research and things like that is very interesting. I'd love the audience to learn about that.
Yeah, like we talked about, I've patented over 40 unique ingredients. I have a brilliant team of people around me that help me file the intellectual property, that do the studies, that manufacture these ingredients. So I'm very blessed in that I can dream something up and it can come into reality very shortly thereafter. And I had already worked on 2 popular energy ingredients called T-crene and dynamine, which is theocrine and methylliberine, that are in probably nearly 1,000 supplements, energy drinks, fat burners. But I was looking for something that was even a cleaner experience. I still sometimes had trouble. I had a lot of trouble with caffeine, but even with these compounds, I was still not experiencing something as clean as I wanted. And just looking, this is so crazy because I was looking at the metabolism of caffeine, and caffeine, which is 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, gets demethylated in the body. When you consume caffeine, the body starts to break it down. Methyl is just a hydrogen group. It's removing a hydrogen at a certain point. And depending on where it removes it, at that 1, 3, or 7, it becomes theophylline, theobromine, or paraxanthine. I obviously knew theophylline very well. Theophylline is a bronchodilator, a ton of side effects. Theobromine, very popular, well known for like cacao, for example, vasodilator, but very little stimulatory properties. And then paraxanthine, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, has anyone made paraxanthine? And to that point, no one had produced it. No, there was no patents filed around it. Probably everyone listening is like, how? How is that even possible?
Wouldn't it, if I could interject, because you're actually talking about the detoxification process in the body, the breaking of the caffeine molecule down, is that correct?
Well, it's the metabolism of it, the general metabolism. You just start pulling off different groups off these chemicals, and over time, like towards the end, it becomes xanthine and uric acid, and gets excreted, and that's the whole process. But prior to that, each of these levels, each of these metabolites have their own physiologic action, and the majority of the side effects that you experience when you have caffeine is from caffeine itself and potentially theophylline and maybe its metabolites. And so if we clear out these things, we avoid the bioindividuality as Daniel was alluding to, because caffeine has a 1.5 hour to 10.5 hour half-life variance. For people that don't know half-life, that means you consume it, and then to get to half that level, it can take 1.5 for some people, or 10.5 for other people. And then to get to a quarter, another 1.5 or 10.5. So to clear this out your system, if you are a slow metabolizer, of which 60% of the population is, it can take days. And that's what it is for me. That's what I found out. So when you and I have the conversation about caffeine, we can be talking about a radically different experience. Yeah. We're not talking about the same compound necessarily. Some people that are fast metabolizers, I have the caffeine or the coffee and go straight to bed. And sometimes, like you were saying, that's from adrenal fatigue, but also it can be just you're a super fast metabolizer of caffeine. And when you're on that end of the spectrum, you get none of the benefits, but none of the side effects. Mm-hmm. And for people that are slow metabolizers, we get none of the benefits and all of the side effects.
Yeah. You must be familiar with Roger Williams' book, Biochemical Individuality.
Yes.
Because he shows in there, for example, that even in the same family, there can be a 1,000% difference in the liver's ability to clear drugs like caffeine and alcohol, right sitting at the same dinner table.
Exactly. And there can be epigenetic expression, that like an evolution that will happen just from what you're consuming day to day. Like if you're having ibuprofen day to day, your body, if you're consuming a lot of chemicals, and I understand like food in general is chemicals, but if you're consuming things that really you shouldn't be consuming, let's say in particular certain substances, certain pharmacological compounds, your body will start to make it a slower process to metabolize those. It's literally trying to slow down the metabolism of these drugs, so it's not as hard on the liver, not as hard on your physiology.
There's also the challenge of the detoxification as well, because from my studies and looking into all this due to all the problems I have with patients, the water-soluble chemicals such as herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and rodenticides, and the things that are coming in on food all the time that are being breathed in and brought in on water, have to be converted from fat-soluble molecules to water-soluble molecules. And what I found is a lot of people don't have the right nutrition or enough nutrition in their bodies to effectively run the cytochrome P448 and P50 pathways of the liver. So the body has to shuttle all those chemicals into fat. And so the fat becomes a repository to protect the body from these chemicals, which then becomes a real problem when people that start going to the gym and training, but they don't know how to eat properly. And so I've found research showing it can cause sclerosis of the liver because the body's being forced to metabolize the fat with these toxic chemicals that it can't convert. So the point I'm making is we've got the metabolism aspects of it, but then we've also got the unique capacity for detoxification, and then we've also got how toxic the body is and what the liver's capacity, the kidney's capacity, the breathing capacity, the sweating capacity. And a lot of people, Michael Mogadun, who's an expert in public health, did research and showed that only 8% of men and 3% of women worldwide do any regularly scheduled exercise, including even walking a dog. So if we just take that one health factor, and you consider the fact that 96% of the food grown and eaten in the world is commercial, which is toxic. Only 4 to 6% of the food grown and eaten in the world is organic. You've got a very, very bad profile of lifestyle issues and nutritional issues while people are getting more and more tired and drinking more and more energy drinks and drinking more and more caffeine, because while their bodies are breaking down, their bills aren't going down. The pressure to make more money, the cost of living is getting higher. So, we'll get into some of this later, but the treadmill's going faster and faster, but they've got less and less resources and vitality. So they keep dipping into all this, which is really biohacking. Yeah. I tell people I don't biohack, I bioharmonize for that very reason. And most of the people that are trying biohacking are trying to take shortcuts to circumvent the side effects of all this stuff we're talking about, which is why I don't like the concept of biohacking at all. I mean, I understand it's a popular term, and when I was on Dave Asprey's podcast, he was all over me about my thoughts about that word and that he invented the word and all that. And I'm like, well, that's good, but I still have these issues with it. I agree. But I'm just bringing these things up because I want people out there to realize you can't get around 4 doctors, Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Movement, and 6 foundation principles: nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and moving. Without those structures or those philosophical guideposts of how do I live, you're going to get lost.
Yeah. So going back to that idea of caffeine being one of these come at a cost ingredients, like in my book, The Energy Formula, I talk a lot about resilience, which is essentially what you're talking about with bioharmonization, is that you have your allostatic capacity, the allostatic load, and that is basically your stress bucket and how much stress you can take on physiologically, mentally, how much the body can take on. And when you're always in a sympathetic nervous system, when you're always pushing, have the accelerator down, like you're saying, and the adrenals are shot and you're in a state of what's called insufficient cellular energy. ICE is the clinical term for a shortfall of mitochondrial energy. And 93% of the population is metabolically dysfunctional, to your point. It means only 7% of people are actually healthy metabolically.
We should just interject there and clarify allostasis, because most people won't know that term. Homeostasis means functional balance. Allostasis means departure from balance. So if you go to the gym and lift weights, you're traumatizing muscles and you get sore afterward. That's an allostatic load. If you got enough sleep and you're living a fairly good lifestyle, you'll achieve homeostasis between workouts. Otherwise, you won't build any muscle or strength because your body will stay broken down. So when Shawn's using the term allostasis, he's talking about how much load is actually on the system. And anabolic means tissue regeneration. Catabolic means tissue destructive. So allostasis is a catabolic stressor, and diet and lifestyle factors like sleep, hydration, all the things I mentioned earlier are the things that bring you into homeostasis. So that's what he means when he says allostasis.
Yeah, you need essentially hormesis to maintain homeostasis.
And explain that.
to be comfortable, to be at balance, at times you need to be out of balance so that you can maintain greater balance, because there's stressors coming in exogenously from outside. Yes. It's just natural that there will be stress. Yeah. So your ability to maintain your resilience, your centeredness, depends upon you having acute stress and training your body yes. to maintain homeostasis ultimately. The problem is when we're chronically stressed, now that's breaking down our physiology.
What you're referring to is what I call, for the public and for my students, dynamic balance. Mm-hmm. Because when you try to balance, say, on a Swiss ball, the ball's never holding still. Right. It's constantly moving. Yeah. But you're still standing on the ball or kneeling on the ball. So you could say that if you can kneel on the ball, then you're in a state of functional adaptation. Now, which is interesting, I'll share this with you just as a side note. Because I work with a lot of very elite athletes, like X Games athletes and motorcycle racers and jumpers and skateboard stars and ski stars and all of these guys, right? A lot of them are party animals. and they stay up late at night and they're having, orgies and all sorts of shit and doing drugs and drinking a lot. And because I develop programs to build them back up, I'm very familiar with how they're performing each step of the way, and I'm using an exercise program. So, for example, let's say I'm working with Danny Way, who's one of the most famous skateboarders in the world. I think he's got 3 Guinness Book of World Records now. You guys know who Danny Way is? He jumped the Great Wall of China. He set the world record for the highest bull jump. He started working with me when he was 18 or 19, and he's 50, and he's still consulting me. So what would happen is I basically developed a way to integrate the nervous system, because like Danny's had 28 orthopedic surgeries, and a lot of these people, their bodies not only don't work the way they should, but they can't work the way they should. So I have to do a lot of very careful analysis to find out which muscles are not working, which joints are not moving properly, and how do I integrate these systems. And sometimes when you have scar tissue and other obstructive factors, whether it be nerve damage or joint damage, you can't easily get the muscles to turn on because there's internal pain factors that are inhibiting the muscles at the spinal cord level. So through experimentation, I found if I put somebody on a Swiss ball and asked them to balance on the ball on their knees, it would trigger what I call a survival reflex. And I tested this with EMGs and found, for example, if a woman's had a cesarean section and the scar, because they cut through all 3 layers of muscle, her core won't work properly. So no matter what you try to do clinically using corrective exercise, you can't get those muscles to turn on. And often I have to do a lot of deep tissue work, mobilize the scar. And still it's hard because the surgeons actually sewed 3 layers of muscles together. And so that it can't function. The layers can't move independently. But interestingly enough, I found something quite wild. And because I would implement an exercise or a strategy, retest, what I found is when a person's body is in a balance threat where the brain thinks it's going to fall, it will override all these temporary inhibitory factors for a period of up to about 3 minutes. So I could take someone like Danny Way, who maybe his rotator cuff's not working properly or his core's not working properly, challenge him in a balance test, and then retest him, and these muscles turned on. So I found that I would have to keep implementing these balance challenges. So here's the punchline. What I found out, because I would actually be monitoring with a stopwatch how long they could stay on the ball, because to do the survival reflex activation, I found you need at least 1 minute of a balance challenge to trick the system into turning on and lasting for about 3 minutes, which will get you through a set of exercise. So I would say, okay, the last 4 times Danny's been on the ball, he could make it for a minute. But then I begin to notice when he was out staying late, and I'm just using Danny as a placeholder for all athletes and all people, when he's out late drinking, partying, doing the things that young men and women do, especially elite athletes, he could sometimes not even stay on the ball for 10 seconds. And this is one of the top skateboarders in the world. So what I found is that the sum total of stress on the nervous system has a total decreasing effect on the body's ability to adapt at any level, be it musculoskeletal, physiological, or psychological. Anyhow, sorry for the interjection, but it fits with the sort of the flow of where we're going with allostasis, homeostasis, dynamic
fits perfectly,
balance.
Paul, because what I've found is, going back to the idea of caffeine being a come at a cost ingredient. When we look at 93% of the population in America consumes caffeine in some form or another, 90% of those people that are consuming caffeine want to consume less, like Daniel mentioned, this kind of sheepish response that people have. The embarrassment, why would someone have embarrassment or shame? Because they know it's not healthy for their physiology. They know that. So there's a cognitive dissonance, but I believe also there's a spiritual dissonance, because it's like, I'm going to have to go back into the well. I'm going to, do this one more day. I'm telling myself, I'm going to get sleep. I'm going to get sleep tomorrow. I'm going to do better tomorrow. I just need the caffeine, the sugar today so I can get through. Yeah. And they know that's the lie they keep telling themselves, and they know that it's hurting them. Yeah. And this is where we want to move forward the idea of caffeine 2.0 or beyond caffeine or caffeine evolved, is we recognize, kind of like you were mentioning, like I'm 50, you're 63, that I recognize, and a lot of journeys have taught me this, like, thank you, Shawn 1.0, for working your ass off, for doing that 80 plus hours a week, for
surviving yourself,
surviving myself and the abuse I did to my body. And it also, created all that education, all that content, all my accolades, all my achievements and my credentials, and I outworked everyone. Also, I will die if I continue that pace. Yes. So that no longer serves me. Thank you. And there's a better way forward. And that's how, we look at caffeine versus paraxanthine. Like, thank you for getting us here. The industrialization, evolution, revolution was really related to caffeine. There wouldn't have been second and third shifts. There wouldn't have been this growth, this boom across the U.S. and Europe had it not been for caffeine. There wouldn't have been the birth of these stock markets and global trading had it not been for caffeine. That really moved society along, but it was just this grind set over mindset. This boom of capitalism and industrialization definitely came at a cost to the global population. It put us in a different mindset where play was not even an option anymore.
One of the challenges with caffeine that most people don't talk about is it pushes you into left brain dominance. So not only does it stimulate the sympathetic system, which basically puts you in a fight or flight response, but whenever you're sympathetically stimulated like that and you're in a fight or flight response, you're left brain dominant, but you go into, I tell people, never throw in a cartwheel if you're running from a lion, which means don't try something new when you feel threatened because you don't have time to figure it out. And so what I believe the long-term effect is it's caused us to completely keep repeating old behaviors that we know in our right mind aren't working. But because we're being pushed into the unconscious, because the unconscious processes information reflexively, it doesn't have to think about it, right? You don't have to think to tie your shoe. You could be stoned out of your mind and drunk and tie your shoe because it's so deeply ingrained in your autonomic patterning to tie a shoe. So what happens is when people are under a lot of stress and they're overstimulating themselves with caffeine, paradoxically, is they keep reverting back to old pathways and old habits. And so it's led to a world of us recapitulating the same beliefs and the same behaviors that have basically led us to the point where we're at now, which is unsustainable.
Yeah, I think it's Michael Pollan who says we live in a caffeinated state. Basically our baseline for, this 90% of the population is just caffeinated. Yeah. And we don't know anything else besides that. And it's always something that you're doing to overcome a deficit, to your point. And I think where that differs from paraxanthine is something that is like a proactive choice to go beyond baseline. You're not taking it necessarily to overcome this deficit that caffeine creates and that you take caffeine for. And so hopefully there's this, shift to this 2.0 world where we get out of this caffeinated consciousness into something more.
One of our podcast sponsors, Wild Pastures, has just released an amazing documentary series on the role of animal products in both diets and ecosystems. It is a deep dive into the health benefits of animal products, challenging the conventional narrative that links meat to chronic illness and debunking myths about the dangers of meat for our bodies and the environment. Featuring leading experts and real-world examples, it makes a compelling case for embracing a more holistic view of food production to restore both personal health and planetary health. As regular listeners of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek will know, Paul adamantly supports responsible livestock farming and regenerative agriculture and highly recommends everybody watch this series. Go to wildpastures.com/rethink meat to watch now. It's completely free and new episodes are released each week. This is something you're going to want to share with your family, friends, co-workers and colleagues. So go to wildpastures.com/rethink meat and start watching now.
Shawn, one thing I'd love to hear more about, because yesterday you were sharing some of the studies on the paraxanthine molecule, and there seems to be quite a lot of them, and on caffeine and how it affects the body. I'd like to hear more about your own investigation into it, and what was it that actually made you say, hey, I've got to test this molecule, because you talked about how most people hadn't been doing anything with it, which maybe was God's gift to you for all your hard work, but take us through that chain of events and what you've found out and what the research is showing.
Yeah, I personally am a slow metabolizer, very slow metabolizer of caffeine, and have lots of side effects and very little benefits. So I've always been searching for an experience similar to people that seem to enjoy caffeine, and I've never had it. I've always just had the sleep disruption, the anxiety, the brain fog. It was truly the worst ingredient for me. Yeah. So for me, I was wondering, and like I said, I came out with T-creen, dynamine, these other ingredients that were very impactful in the supplement realm. I'm sure many people listening have tried them, had products with them. Again, they're in probably more than 1,000 products. Any pre-workout, I'm sure you've tried them. But paraxanthine was something of, as you said, a kind of a divine thing for me when I was looking at what could be better, what could be next, what could be even beyond that. And I think a lot of people kind of forewent the idea of this being patentable or different because they just assumed about 70 to 80% of caffeine gets converted into this. And so what's the difference? I've already had it. Mm-hmm. And so what's nice on a physiologic level, we talked about this yesterday, that trillions of doses essentially of paraxanthine have been experienced across humanity because caffeine gets metabolized into this. So everyone's had paraxanthine in their body. The problem is it is a drip drop kind of approach when you're a slow metabolizer, and you're getting stuck in that process of this toxic caffeine that has all the side effects. So for me, I was never experiencing the true benefit of paraxanthine and only experiencing all the side effects of caffeine and theophylline.
So it was acting like a blocking factor for the benefits of the paraxanthine.
Exactly. The true benefit is paraxanthine, and we actually think that 3-methyl group that is not present in paraxanthine and is present in caffeine is the one that's really associated with the majority of the side effects. So this demethylated caffeine is what we've found to be so incredibly clean. And when you clear out all of these other things, you get to experience it in its totality without the side effects. And the data that we are amassing just shows that it's night and day different. It isn't like kind of like caffeine. It's completely different, and that's been your experience. That's everyone's experience that tries it.
That's what got me right out of the gate. I'm like, what the hell is in here? Because it is not doing anything like any other drink. To have your mind feel clear like that, but your body stay relaxed, was quite a surprise.
Yeah, I refer to it as the flow without the frazzle. Like both of them are stimulating the central nervous system to some degree and inhibiting adenosine, which is creating that wakefulness. But you're getting into a flow state with paraxanthine, whereas caffeine, you're getting that frazzle. And that's what we see. Like I went through some studies with you, and we did one study where we did a 10K race with athletes, and we did a multitasking, or said more appropriately, a task switching test prior to the race and then after the race. And what we saw was with caffeine, so this is a crossover design where what I love about that is each of the athletes are in all of the different arms. Right. So their bio-individuality is going to cross over across all these different arms, which is great.
Arms meaning different tasks?
Different experimental groups.
Okay.
Like, so there's actually 4 groups in these arms. So it's going to be caffeine plus paraxanthine, and placebo. So if we look at those 4 arms, what we saw was after the race, there was a 23% increase in mental errors with the caffeine group. There was about a 14% increase in mental errors with caffeine plus paraxanthine, about a 4% increase with placebo, and that makes sense. Placebo means, that there was technically no intervention, but they didn't know it, right? The control group. And so it makes sense that they're a little bit more tired after the race and that they would have more errors. But think about 23% is 20% higher with the caffeine, so you're getting more of that frazzle. Like, yes, you're getting stimulated, but it's also coming at a cost where you're performing worse mentally, and your fatigue maybe physically is not as great, but mentally is certainly greater.
It's like driving faster when you're more tired. It gets to be more problematic.
Exactly. And here's the kicker, though, is that paraxanthine was an 11% decrease in mental errors. So they perform better post-race because of the paraxanthine kicking in and overriding. And so we see that flow state where you're actually performing better mentally. And yes, you're getting the stimulation, but you're in that flow state. So if you look at the delta or the difference between the two, between the caffeine and the paraxanthine group, the difference is massive. A 23% increase in mental errors versus an 11% decrease in mental errors.
It would be very interesting to run a study, and I'm sure an exercise physiologist could put this together quite easily, to see if the paraxanthine is actually causing the body to become more efficient, either metabolically or biomechanically, due to the sort of the flow of the nervous system and how it's affecting the neurotransmitters and the hormones. Because it could ultimately be that the athletes are more efficient.
That's definitely the case. We're seeing that calcium ions are getting improved pretty dramatically. So that's like muscular contraction. We're seeing increased BDNF, so brain-derived neurotrophic factor, protein associated with neuroplasticity, protecting the neurons, creating new neurons. We're seeing a decrease in beta amyloid plaque, increase in acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, increase in glutathione and catalase, the master antioxidant, and a decrease in oxidative stress as a result, an increase in nitric oxide pretty dramatically, a 50% increase in nitric oxide.
Which will support your immune system.
Via PDE9 inhibition. So this is a dramatic effect on not only putting you into a more stimulated state, but again, going back more into that flow state. And then when we look at, a study is about to publish with e-gamers doing Super Smash Brothers. What we saw, we actually test them at 0, which is baseline, 1 hour and 2 hours. So they're playing Smash Brothers the entire time, and then we're testing them at 3 different time points where they take time away from the game, and we're doing a Stroop test, which is a memory concentration test. And what we saw is that with caffeine, there's a declination in performance over time. It is truly a come at a cost ingredient. And what we see with paraxanthine is not only was there acute benefit where they didn't fatigue out and they performed better, but the more they were taking it at 3 weeks and at 6 weeks, they continue to get better and better and better.
In the memory or the game performance, or both?
Both.
That's
both.
Good.
And so that is a dramatic difference against caffeine. We know caffeine has an adaptation effect where it keeps taking like more and more and more to get the same effect. It also has a habituation effect where there's a physiologic dependence, and we're not seeing that with paraxanthine in either case. There's not the physiologic dependence, and there's not this negative adaptation effect. In fact, we're seeing a positive adaptation effect where it's actually neuroprotective and improving the health of the brain with continued use.
It's interesting because as we were talking yesterday when we were reviewing some of these studies together, one of the side effects of caffeine is a loss of short-term memory, and that's also a classic symptom of adrenal fatigue. People will, one of the things I ask patients in my initial interview is, do you find yourself reading and having to read the same paragraph over and over again because you can't remember what you read? And almost always anyone with adrenal fatigue says yes. And people will even report, I can't even remember my own phone number. So one of the ways I know how burnt out the adrenals are is by how repetitive a process is that they cannot remember. For example, most people have used their own phone number thousands and thousands of times, so it should be fairly deep in the memory system and quite automatic. But when you get to the point where you can't remember, like the padlock to your tool shed that you've opened, 1,000 times, or your own phone number, you're dealing usually now with late phase 2, phase 3 adrenal exhaustion. But so when paraxanthine's actually enhancing that, what it says to me that is it's actually a lot less stressful for the body to process that molecule. Aside from the cognitive benefits and all the other things, it seems to be that there's less total stress on the body, so that the global effect is a lot different.
Well, what's incredible, if you think about the way that the brain ages, it's going to be less blood flow to the brain. It's going to be less neuroplasticity, increased oxidative stress, increased beta amyloid plaque, and decreased dopamine, like associated with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, et cetera. And literally, paraxanthine's reversing all of those mechanisms.
And tell me the connection again with glutathione. I thought that was very interesting, because I think glutathione's something that very few people are aware of how beneficial it is. And I'll tell you a quick glutathione story. I used to, years ago, from me vaporizing, I started getting a little spot under my left eye. And I immediately thought, what the hell is that? And I thought, well, it must be all the oils from the tobacco and the essential oils I'm using, and I just can't detoxify them. So I thought, well, I'm going to run a test. I'm going to cut back on the vaporizing, and I'm going to do 2 saunas a day. And within 3 days, the spot disappeared. But I didn't have the time to keep doing that much detoxification work. And I just really enjoy my tobacco. When I went through my midlife crisis, my promise to myself was, if I can't make my work fun, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so whenever I have a bag of smoke, that's my reminder to myself that I'm choosing to do this and that it's fun. And so the spot started getting thicker because I was under heavy workload, et cetera, et cetera. And Angie's a nutritionist, and she said, Paul, why don't you try glutathione? So she got me a high-quality organic liposomal glutathione, and I literally watched the spot disappear, and within about a week it was completely gone. And I've been on 1 capsule of glutathione a day for several years now, and it's never come back. And I just think it had a sort of an overall beneficial effect on my body. So I think the connection between paraxanthine and glutathione, because of the toxicity in our environment and all the toxicity from vaccinations and just the everything, the water supply, chemtrails, I think people need to know that there is a correlation between the paraxanthine and the glutathione. So if you can kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, paraxanthine itself is an antioxidant, but on top of it, it's stimulating this antioxidative detoxification pathway. And we're seeing both the master antioxidant, as it's known, glutathione, and catalase, which is an important one too. We haven't looked at things like SOD and maybe some of these other ones. But that's what we're seeing, a significant elevation in these powerful antioxidants, and as a result, pretty dramatic decrease in oxidative stress, both across the physiology and the brain.
So that makes me ask you a question. Is there potentially a place to use Update supplementally? And if so, what would be a supplemental dose just to support our oxidative, decreasing oxidative stress and everything we've just been talking about?
Well, one thing we haven't looked at yet, like we were looking at in all these studies, we're finding 200 and 300 milligrams optimal for getting into this flow state. Actually, we haven't talked about, there's a study increasing thermogenesis, decreasing fat mass via lipolysis. And so that's exciting, a study we just published as well. But we haven't looked at like the idea of kind of it being time released or kind of microdosing it, and what some of those effects could be. Maybe I know some people might have like a third of one and put it away and another third of a update, or that could be really interesting to explore. But people always want to know, well, what does 300 milligrams in update of paraxanthine, what does that equal in terms of caffeine? There's no real...
They're two different animals.
Yeah,
really.
it's just people ask that question all the time, and it does not feel the same at all. I can't really make a correlation to that.
Yeah, it is. It's very different, but it's to me, it's just a lot better.
Yeah.
Because you're getting what you're looking for with the caffeine, but without all the negative baggage that goes with it. It's it's miraculous enough to make me want to talk to you guys about it. And I'm one of these people, like if I'm getting enough sleep, which that's my Achilles heel, just because as I shared with you guys, I got to get up early in the morning before my kids and everybody comes around, or I don't have time to be deep enough into myself to do my own inner spiritual work, which requires mental focus, because I'm doing a lot of things like astral travel, remote viewing, or various other things where you can't have your mind jumping around. But what I found just experimenting with it is I only need about a third of a can to get to that state, but I don't have this urge to drink more. Like when I was at Cal's place and I was quite tired, I did drink the whole can and I felt great. But as I got home and got rested, and I'd like be trying at my desk working and writing where I'm using my mind a lot, I just naturally felt like I didn't need any more. So I didn't have any inner sense of take more. So I thought, well, why take more if I don't need it? And so I'd put the can and in the refrigerator, and as long as it didn't lose its fizzle, I would just use it the next day, which I think is important for people to know, because you can actually use it like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you would find if you were to keep consuming it, for example, is unlike a traditional energy drink or caffeine, you're not going to get over a hump where you then start feeling overstimulated or jittery or crash. You'll still feel that same kind of flow state, real focus and productivity. It's not going to all of a sudden flip that switch on you, right? So you can go days where you can have a third of a can, like you said. You can have one. I've had days where I've had more than that, and it won't tip me over that edge. Whereas if I was to be consuming caffeine like that nowadays, game over. And one of the big things we haven't spoken about is we've seen that you can drink this much later in the day.
I was just going to mention
than caffeine. So there was a study I was sharing with Shawn yesterday that Ben Greenfield had shared on his social media, and it was showing that if you consume greater than 100 milligrams of caffeine anywhere between 12 hours prior to falling asleep, it's going to really disrupt your sleep. What's interesting about Update is we're finding and hearing from people who are measuring this with Oura rings, with Whoop bands. They can consume this much later in the day. Often at times people will be consuming this 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, and it's not disrupting their sleep. It's not keeping them up at night. In fact, people have reported having an even better sleep, right? It's not all of a sudden elevating your heart rate and making it spike like caffeine would.
So it's suggesting it's not elevating cortisol levels. That'd be an interesting study for you guys to do.
A lot of people are telling us that the reason they gravitate to this is because, like I said, everyone wants energy, everyone wants to be focused. But what it's not doing is raising anxiety levels.
Yeah, exactly. And not only do you have the half-life issue of caffeine, but the half-life of cortisol is another issue. And as you guys know, cortisol is an antagonist to melatonin. So if I tell people all the time, because I have so many caffeine addicts, don't drink caffeine any later than 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's still pushing it. Because if realistically, I would say don't drink it past about noon. But I can't realistically expect people to do that because they get tired in the afternoon. So I say, look, if you're going to do it before 3 o'clock or you're not going to sleep. And they say, well, I sleep 8 hours a night. I said, yeah, well, if we were to do a study on you, you would not be getting into deep restorative sleep. You would just be getting shallow sleep that's not a quality sleep. So, because I've had lots of people that are getting enough sleep on paper, but they have all the signs of sleep deprivation at every level of their being.
And sleep apnea
on
top of that.
Yeah, that's another problem that's pretty common out there. I won't go off on that because that's a long discussion, but I think especially for people that work hard physically and are athletic, like for me, all the athletes I work with, I would absolutely love to see them switch. In fact, what I'm going to do is see if I can coordinate with you guys to get some of this to Danny Way to use, because I know it'll be a great gift to him, and he's connected to all these X Game people. I would love to see you guys sponsoring some of these athletes with something that actually works instead of all the crap they keep putting in their bodies, because it's really shortening their shelf life.
Yeah, it's having the most effect on people that are the most fatigued or most stressed. And so those would be like athletes or people that are older.
Shift workers.
Shift workers, exactly. When we did a study, a preclinical study with rodents, and we looked at a tub that was maybe like 5-6 feet around, and you blacken the water, you put like kind of an ink coloring in the water so that they can't see, and then you have like a ledge, and you show them where like this little ledge is on the side of this circular pool, and then you drop them in the middle, and then you see how long it takes for them to evacuate, find the ledge, and it's called like escape latency, and how long it takes for them to find that ledge. And when we looked at older rodents, it took a little over a minute for them to swim, or like 63 seconds for them to swim around and find that ledge after they, were shown the ledge, then dropped in the middle. With paraxanthine, it took 23 seconds. So that's literally like a third of the time. That is not like, statistically a significant difference would be like 50 seconds. To cut it in a third is very dramatic. And so that's what we see is like with athletes, with the aged brain, with people that are under stress, like maybe like you're saying, like shift workers, we see a more dramatic result.
Do you know of any foods or herbs that have higher levels of paraxanthine? Does it exist in nature?
It does exist in nature, pretty trace quantities. It's involved in, like, it's caffeine metabolism. So all the plants that have caffeine present in them have some of these various metabolites present in them in trace quantities. So things like cacao and green coffee berry and green tea, things like that.
The problem is you're getting the caffeine with those.
Exactly. And what we see, I was alluding to that before. Every study we've done, we've looked at paraxanthine versus caffeine. We've also looked at the combination, and the combination worsens the effect. It's not as bad as pure caffeine, but it's worsened. So paraxanthine is going to be the cleanest way forward for you to experience like all these benefits, and I would not dirty the water with caffeine, so to speak.
Yeah. And having a long history of caffeine use myself, I think it's fair to say from my own experience, you guys can correct me if you're wrong, but there's a certain feeling you get when you're used to having caffeine, where it brings you to eventually to a point of satiation where you say, okay, I've had my 2 cups, and you go off on your day. If you had less than that, you'd say, God, I'm really missing that cup. But there's not really much else you can substitute to get that feeling. But when I have been experimenting with Update, I don't feel like I need the caffeine because it's given me that level of satisfaction without the negative side effects. But it's not like, for example, when I'm trying to get people off of coffee, one of the standard tactics is to switch them first to black tea, then to progressively less caffeinated teas. Well, every one of them says, oh my God, it's just not the same. And it's not. But when I tried Update and started experimenting with it, I thought, wow, this is really wild, because I could drink this in the morning instead of an espresso, and I would not miss the espresso. And I think that's a rare quality.
Yeah, it's like Daniel was mentioning the caffeinated you that like Michael Pollan talks about, this caffeinated consciousness. It's like this frazzled version of you that is anxious and stressed, and you're passing on that stress to the people around you. Yeah. Whereas paraxanthine is kind of the optimized version of you. Like, it's really what everyone was seeking in the first place, is like this lifted, best version of themselves.
Yeah. So from a social perspective, it could have a profound knock-on effect.
For sure.
Yeah. In fact, we're finding people who are drinking this socially are finding that it really elevates their mood, right? Yeah. And it's, you kind of alluded to this earlier. It's a really different feeling to caffeine. You can't compare them apples to apples. Mm-hmm. This really is a big motivational kind of mood boost, elevates your dopamine, makes you really get into that productive flow, but you don't feel like you've got blinders on. No. You feel like you can...
You don't feel like you're in a hurry either. Caffeine gives you sort of an urgency if you get enough of it in you. Everything feels
and it
urgent.
Exacerbates that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this doesn't.
Like you guys use the term flow state. It is very, very authentic to use that terminology. Like I said to Cal Callahan, I said, I feel like I've just done 30 minutes of Tai Chi. And I've done a lot of Tai Chi. And I thought, if I can drink something that makes me feel like that, that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, I find like caffeine not makes me anxious. It's almost like you're, if like, like mescaline, right, is like kind of like Ben's time. Like on the opposite end of the spectrum for me would be caffeine, where I'm like hyper aware of time. And, there is a super chiasmatic nucleus that's like your master clock in your body, kind of setting the circadian rhythm. It's like I just become so aware of every second. I need to maximize every second. It's just so frazzling, so exhausting. Literally, the expense of ATP, like you were mentioning, like that this could be optimizing you and in a greater efficiency than something that's frazzling like caffeine.
It'd be very interesting because I've looked at the at research on the cost to insurance companies and workman's compensation and lost time at work due to sleep deprivation. Yeah. And those are the people that are usually jacking up on caffeine. Yep. But because of the studies you've talked about with the memory task and the athletes doing task switching, it could have a massive reduction in injury costs and, of course, illness costs, because anything that burns your adrenal glands sets you up for illness, because the higher your cortisol levels, the more repressed your immune system gets. That's one of the problems with sugar. I got one book and one research paper here in my office showing that 1 teaspoon of sugar will repress the immune system for 6 hours. The first book that I read then is a book called Body Wise by Dr. John Briefa from England. And I think that book came out around the year 2000, and that was pretty surprising information. Then I found another scientific paper that basically came to the same conclusions. And I think I can't remember Shawn, you might know this, but the average American's consuming something like 1.5 cups of sugar a day, or 47 teaspoons or something frickin' crazy. I mean, the knock-on negatives of that is just through the roof. One of the things we were going to talk about is sort of how we got ourselves into this caffeinated, buzzed out, industrialized relationship. You did talk about the history of caffeine and its early days, and it was a big money maker too. It still is. I was listening to an expert in economics once, and he said there's 3 things that never drop for sales in a depression: coffee, alcohol, and tobacco. So there you go, guys. If you want a business that makes it through a depression, and let's see if we can
hopefully this soon as well.
Update will be the next one. But what I'd like to do is talk about the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual correlations to this, because I think this conversation could sound as important as it is. It sounds very biochemical and sort of like, okay, let's just switch drugs. But there's a lot more deeper issues going on. For example, from the physical perspective, I think one of the things, aside from the fact that with the Industrial Revolution, people started working in factories and they started spending more and more time at work to make more money because they were spending more than they earned. And so we kind of got ushered into this sort of capture, like the control oligarchs, the money lords, captured us by putting us on this treadmill. But I think if you look, for example, I've got studies in my library showing that during the First and Second World War, when there was food shortages, in both instances, approximately 50% of the people worldwide grew food in their backyards, and the rate of illnesses and diseases went down very, very low. But as soon as the war were over and they started all the processing of food again, the illnesses and diseases rose right back up to previous levels and have never stopped climbing. So when I think, when we look at the concepts of, what is nutrition? Well, it comes from real food. How important is water? Very important. How much people drink enough water? 90 to 95% of the world population is dehydrated. Only 1% dehydration of the central nervous system causes significant psychological disorders. How many psychiatrists have ever asked you if you're drinking enough water? Or psychologists? When you look at the quality of sleep, the average college student today is only getting 4.5 hours of sleep. The average person across the board in some studies say is getting 6.5 to 7 hours of sleep, but we typically need 8 unless proven otherwise. Breathing. Very few people know how to breathe. I've tested the breathing pattern of thousands and thousands of people in my life, and I can count on one, maybe two hands, the number of people, even advanced yogis, that have a normal breathing pattern. What is that? When you inhale, the first 2/3 of the breath should come from belly expansion, because that means the diaphragm's dropping down to create a negative pressure in the thorax to draw air in. And if your belly doesn't drop down, you can't not get a normal volume of breath. So what happens to compensate is you breathe more times per minute, which results in the outgassing of too much CO2, which means you have too much oxygen relative to CO2, so it overstimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And the side effects of that are tremendous, because it's the same as having high cortisol levels. And so the last third of the breath is only when the chest should begin to move. About 99% of the people that I breathe, even after going to breathing workshops and doing yoga, are chest-dominant breathers, and they often have what's called an inverted breathing pattern. As they inhale, they tighten their abdominal muscles instead of relaxing them, which I've found to be the side effect of a physical, emotional, or mental trauma that's not resolved. Because our reaction when we feel threatened is to brace for engagement, for impact, for battle. So psychologically, we do the same thing we would do if we were getting into a boxing ring. We tighten everything up. And as your cortisol levels goes up, you have an increase in muscle tension, because it's part of the readiness system of the body to get ready to fight or flight.
And now Bioptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough is available in a delicious flavored drink powder. It's packed with all 8 forms of magnesium, sweetened with Katem fruit extract that is 3,000 times sweeter than sucrose but does not spike glucose when metabolized, and made with organic flavors and colors. Choose from fruit punch flavor, raspberry lemonade, banana mango, or add your own choice to the unflavored options. To try Magnesium Breakthrough drink, go to bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code PAUL10 for 10% off your first order. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4, the letter D, and the promo code is PAUL10.
So we've got nutrition, we've got hydration, we've got sleep, we got breathing, and we got thinking. Most people are so fear-driven, and that's what happens when you get pushed into your left brain and you're wound up all the time. If you have an unresolved fear pattern where you're maybe traumatized as a child, or you are afraid because your finances are not stressed, what the research shows is as cortisol levels go up, people start constantly scanning the environment for threats. And then when they look at studies of attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they find the kids with this can't keep their mind focused, so they're constantly bouncing around the room, which is a side effect of the nervous system constantly looking to see if there's a threat in the environment. So if we look at nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement, which I've just touched on very, very briefly, we can see that these are all factors that have a direct impact on our physicality. And so when people are in that state, they get tired more quickly because all systems are go all the time. So there's not really a resting, like if you think like in European countries where they have a siesta, they take the afternoon off, they sleep in the morning, they have a much more balanced approach than we do, say in the United States and Canada and places like that. And they seem to have lower levels of stress than you look at the centenarians and people like that. They almost always have a more relaxed approach to life. than a lot of us do in the industrialized West, where it's all go, 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 rush, 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 spend, 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 shop till you drop. If you're not happy, go buy something. It's kind of like we've created this whole psychological approach to healing by spending money and getting ourselves into worse debt and more stress. So when we look at all these factors, you can see how people are using caffeine almost like the way athletes that don't know how to train properly have to use wraps, creams, and pills all the time because they don't know how to manage their training cycle or their rest cycle. They don't know how to mobilize. They don't know how to stretch. So they come to me with bags of pills and special wraps for their knees and their this and their that. And, first thing I do is try to get them off of all that stuff because it's a sign that they don't know how to take care of themselves. So if we look at the correlation between these things and caffeine, it seems like we're talking about all the benefits of paraxanthine, but underneath all this, there is a bigger story. And the bigger story is we've really lost touch with what it means to live a healthy lifestyle. And then when you get government agencies and even nutritional bodies producing food pyramids that are completely and utterly fucking backwards, I mean, straight up just wrong. 16 to 20 servings of carbohydrate and all the crap you guys know about. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on if there's anything I've missed on this connection between the physical aspects of ourselves and the caffeine and the knock-on effects that's having.
We're a society that uses caffeine to plug a hole, right? Yeah. You wake up, first thing you do, you and I saw each other this morning at 6 a.m. and the first thing we did was have an espresso together, right? And
I don't do that because I need it, though. I do it because it's a work of art. How was it?
And it was a work of art, and I'll be back for it again. But, you wake up and there's this kind of ritual, this desire to have it. And then, you go through the day, you hit that afternoon slump and people crave and they go to grab caffeine again. Then, of course, because you're having it later in the day, your sleep is going to be disrupted. You wake up the next morning, you feel, brain fog, and the first thing you do is reach for that caffeine again. And it's just like this flywheel effect. And, I think what's nice about paraxanthine as an ingredient, whether you drink it in Update or take it as a standalone ingredient, is it provides you an alternative. We're not here trying to say don't drink caffeine, right? And I love the cup of coffee, but it provides you this alternative to start realizing you can get that pick-me-up later in the day or at different parts of the time of the day where it's not going to have that impact on you. And then you can actually have that cup of coffee in the morning where you're doing it because you genuinely like the taste, like the experience. You're not doing it because you're trying to overcome a deficit.
Yeah, what thought just came to me, because for me, I love the flavor, the smell, the mouthfeel of a really well-made espresso. So whether I've had enough sleep or not, I want it because the act of making it, having the right grinder, the best beans, for me, it's, like I said, an art form. There's definitely days where I'm glad I have it because I have worked late or I've been traveling, which now I would use Update for. What I learned from rehabbing so many people that got sick using too much caffeine and it was part of a dysfunctional lifestyle is that we each have a threshold. And that will change from person to person. For me, it just happens to be one shot of espresso, which we had this morning, a single 1 ounce. And if I go more than that, even a little bit more, I will be addicted the next day. I will literally drink if I drank a shot and a half today, tomorrow when I drink my normal one shot, I will still feel like I need something. And if I don't fulfill it, then I have to go through some level of withdrawal symptoms. Why I'm bringing this up is I think one effective way for people to use Update and paraxanthine is if you experiment to find out what is your threshold for tolerance so that you're not putting so much allostatic load or physiological stress on yourself that you can still enjoy it, but then you can say, okay, if I'm tired and it's just a fact of my life, then you could drink Update. Yeah. Because if you like, we love the espresso experience, right? Yeah. But I wouldn't not drink my espresso just because I have Update because it's an experience that I like, but I will now use Update so that I don't have to try to cross the threshold and deal with the consequences. So I think we can kind of get the best of both worlds, but it takes awareness. You got to say, okay, you know, what is my threshold? And I told you yesterday I would share a technique that I developed with you guys. And I figured this out myself because I had to go through 2 ball buster rounds of the first time I had to get off of coffee. I knew I was in trouble because I used to drink a double shot of espresso in the morning, and that would get me through my hard workout and then the first half of the day. Then by about 3 in the afternoon, 2 to 3, I would just get into a hell of a slump and I couldn't think, and I had a lot of patience and writing and very, very busy life. And so I would do my second double shot after lunch was my standard process because I'm traveling all over the world and I was at restaurants, so I could just get my second blast. And I realized that it was starting to give me headaches and making me more tired. And I'm like, okay, now I'm fucked because my backup plan's not working anymore. And so then I was studying functional medicine testing, and I did an internship with a master of functional medicine for 3 years and ran tests on myself and found that my 24 cortisol rhythm was shot. I was just high cortisol in the morning, but low cortisol output for the other 3 markers in the 24 cycle. Through all this, I had to figure out, well, how do I get through this? Because it took me a year the first time to get to where my hormonal system would regulate itself properly again. And it was a hard year. I mean, I walked around feeling empty-headed. I felt like I needed coffee all the time. Penny went through it with me. We both had the same problem. And I got off, and I went several years, but I was on the road traveling again, exhausted, day and night, moving on airplanes constantly. To give you an example, I've done 47 lectures in 7 countries in 4 weeks before. And that's hard on your body. And I'm all over the world. And so I went through the damn thing again. So then I said, okay, I got to figure out how to get through this because I can't take a year. And so what I did is I was, having studied homeopathy quite a lot, I thought, okay, I've got to figure out a way to make myself a homeopathic dose of coffee. So I asked my soul, what should I do about this? And my soul said, Paul, take a dozen dark roast coffee beans and put them in your pocket. And whenever you feel like you're having a caffeine low, just take 3 beans and chew them as long as you can and suck them, but try not to swallow it so that you're getting a micro dose of caffeine. And I actually, to this day, using that technique, I was able to get myself through the withdrawal with no problem, and I've never had to use more than a dozen beans. The secret is they need to be dark roasted or they taste like shit. But they're dark roasted. They got a bit of a nice caramelized flavor to them, and they're really quite palatable. Kind of like when you get chocolate with coffee beans in it, it tastes nice. And so I was telling you guys, I had a client who was drinking 25 cups of coffee a day and was so hypothyroid, she'd lost her eyebrows and her fingernails had all fallen out, her hair was falling out. And using this technique, what I did is I took her and said, I want you to drink espresso because you get a lot less, the longer you expose the water to the coffee bean, such as a drip coffee maker, the more caffeine you get. There's a lot less caffeine in espresso because it comes through so fast. The average espresso, if the machine's calibrated right, takes between 19 and 24 seconds to pull the 1 ounce shot, where drip coffee can take 3-4 minutes before it's through. So you're getting a lot more caffeine because of the water exposure. So I switched her to 1 shot of espresso in the morning and said, hey, just use these coffee beans. And she was able to go completely off of 25 cups of coffee by just drinking 1 shot of espresso and using these beans. And I've never had anybody else have to go more than 12 beans in a day. If you take 3 at a time and you chew them long and slow and suck the juices out of them, because it tells the body the caffeine's there and it acts as though it is there, and it takes the headache away and the kind of doldrums away. So I think the point I'm making is we each have to sort of take it upon ourselves to find out where our threshold is and know, okay, if I cross the threshold, now I'm going right back to where I'm digging a grave again for myself. And now I can enjoy the caffeine up to the threshold, but I can use update as my backup plan. And you may find the update so satisfying that you don't even want the caffeine anymore. It depends on the person. Most people drink what I call Brazilian tea, which is just shit in a cup, being lousy coffee. In other words, they're not into it as an art form. so they wouldn't probably miss it that much. So I think a lot of people would benefit if they would really just identify where their threshold is, carry some dark roasted coffee beans if they cross the threshold and need a backup so they don't drink so much coffee. But by mixing update with coffee, I think we could get the joy of the espresso or the coffee and the benefits of the update and not wipe ourselves out in the process.
That's exactly what I've done for myself. I was sharing with you yesterday, I used to have like 5 espresso-based coffee drinks a day, starting at 7 a.m. and probably finishing at 4 or 5 p.m. And now what I do is I have, the one in the morning, and I love it. And for me, that's like a really sacred experience. And I drink it really not so much for the buzz, but really for all the things you were talking about before, the texture, the smell, the sound, everything around it, the process. And now what I do is I have, 1 or 2 updates throughout the day, and that gets me, through the day. And what I find is if I go a day where I'm unable to have update, if I'm traveling, and so then I revert back to my old self and have more coffee, not only do I feel physically terrible, but mentally I feel like I'm cheating myself. And it's like taking
the addict,
2 steps forward,
the guilt
and 3
of the
steps
addict.
back. It really is. It's really quite funny. I really hate the feeling when I have to do that.
Well, I shared with you guys yesterday, I would define what an addict is in my observation. I came up with my own definition because a lot of the dictionary definitions were very, very heady and technical. So I define an addiction as any repeated behavior that does not produce the results you want. And that's really what an addiction is. When you're drinking coffee and it's not producing the results you want, but you keep doing it to yourself, that's an addiction. If you keep having sex with someone to the point that it doesn't feel like love anymore, it's just masturbating with someone else's body, it's a repeated behavior that's not producing the results you want. It's not enhancing the connection in the relationship. So you got an addiction. If you're exercising to the point that your body's breaking down and you're not improving your athletic ability, then you have an addiction. So I have to say, okay, what is it that you're running from, or what is it that you're medicating with the exercise? So I think if we apply that to this issue, we have to say, what is the repeated behavior that's not producing the results you want? And oftentimes the coffee is what's allowing us to continue the actual repeated behavior that's not producing the results we want. What's an example of that? Well, how about working in a job that you don't want to be at every day and convincing yourself to do it? How about being in a marriage that you've wanted out of for 10 years, but you keep talking yourself out of it because you're afraid, and fear never makes a good seeing eye dog, and then the list is very long. So people are actually using the coffee to fuel a deeper addiction.
The addiction to fuel the addiction.
Yeah, it's often a fear or an insecurity that's not getting addressed. And another thing that we don't hear talked about too much in social circles is that caffeine is much harder on women than it is on men. Because women's hormonal systems are much more tightly regulated because they're designed to carry 2 bodies. So they actually get symptoms. Like when I owned my physical therapy clinic and worked in a physical therapy clinic for 4 years, I owned my own for 3 years, I worked for a chiropractor for 2 years, there's no question women come to doctors and therapists for help way sooner than men do. So they're much better patients, they're more proactive. But because a woman's hormone tolerances are set so that she actually will have the reserves on board to carry a fetus for 9 months, she's much more sensitive to any kind of drug or toxin. And one of the things I found that caffeine does is it's very hard on relationships, because when women get into this state of caffeine withdrawal and they're burning themselves out, pushing themselves too hard, as their emotions become much more erratic than men typically become because of the dynamics of the female hormonal system and the repercussions of the imbalance. And so one of the things I say to women is, if you don't have a steady, healthy menstrual cycle, then you should stay the hell away from coffee, because every single patient I've ever worked with that came to me that had problems, that was drinking coffee, had a disrupted menstrual cycle. And it's very, very hard to normalize a menstrual cycle when you've got caffeine in the system. Unless you're pulling a lot of tricks and using a lot of nutritional supplementation and things to compensate for the compensations, it's a rough road for females. And I think when you look at how important women are in the world and how important they are to us men, I mean, I've got 2 wives. Obviously, I have a lot of value for the female. And I think the female is so needed in the world right now because we're so yang dominant and so masculine dominant. Yeah. And women are much more about holding things together, about connection and about feeling. We're like arrows flying at a target, get out of my way or I'll kill you kind of mentality. A guy that's driven is an arrow flying. But a woman's so important to us to, I can tell you I've learned so much from Angie and Penny about how important it is for me to, even if it means to be late getting some projects done, to spend more time with my kids or to be at home for dinner together. I wouldn't be the same man I am, and I would not have been nearly as balanced as I am if I didn't have the influence of females. But if we start masculinizing the women, then what you get is kids eating TV dinners and watching television instead of having a family connection, and that the knock-on effects of that alone are devastating.
Well, and it's exhausting, right, to the female physiology and mentality to be in that masculine energy all the time. It's exhausting. It's not their natural state of being. Obviously, as men, we need to get in our feminine energy. As women, they need to get in their masculine energy at times. But it's when you're chronically doing that, and women are all about doing instead of being, I mean, that's not only toxic to the individual, but it's toxic to our society.
You mean when they become about doing instead of being?
Exactly,
yeah.
instead of being, yeah. So, exactly, I definitely see that masculine energy of, and it's not even just masculine energy. It's like, about the Peruvian animals, right? Like the kind of energies that you can take on. Like a masculine energy would be that puma, but it's not just a puma. It's like a wounded puma, right? That there's
the puma that overhunts.
Yeah, it's that come at a cost thing, like where that puma's maybe bleeding out but still pushing. It's not a healthy masculine energy, and for them to embody that chronically is like you're saying, if it's come at a cost to a man, it's certainly come at a greater cost to a woman.
Which means it comes at a great cost to the kids.
Exactly.
Because it's breaking the family up, and there's a lot more arguments. I've had many athletes I've had to counsel 2 things. One, Monster, Red Bull, coffee is one problem. Marijuana is another, because there's so many athletes now that use marijuana for pain management. So I'm speaking here of the emotional consequences. The caffeine's raising your adrenaline up and your cortisol levels up. So it's this fight or flight behavior, and so your emotional dynamism becomes very narrow. So it's constantly push, go, fight, get it done, and sort of like a frenetic way of living. So what it does is it takes our capacity to breathe away, our capacity to listen away, our capacity to have empathy away, and instead it becomes like, how quick can I get this over so I can do what I'm thinking I've got to get done? And so you lose this sense of connection to yourself and to other people. And then, of course, you have all the effects of the burnout, right? But the problem with the marijuana that I've seen over and over again is because it takes about 3 weeks, based on the studies I've looked at, to clear the THC molecule out of most people's bodies. And so the more they smoke, the more it clogs up receptor sites on the cells, and so their hormonal system can't regulate. And so I've watched men and women, but there's more men I've seen with this problem because there's so much more male athletes at the elite level, that they start smoking pot all the time, and the next thing you know, they're emotionally all over the place because their hormonal system cannot regulate properly. And then I would have to put them through detoxes, and there's various supplements and kits you can get now that help clean the THC out of the body, and I've used those many times with athletes. And you watch them change right in front of you. It's like a completely different person 3 weeks or a month later. And then with the right supplementation and then working on sleeping and all the other things that we've been talking about, it makes a world of difference. But I think, when we look at how important emotions are, they're really a source of intelligence. This is why we have IQ and EQ and SQ, emotional quotient and spiritual quotient. We have emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, and we're very, very lacking in emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence pretty much worldwide. There, maybe some places in India or Tibet might be a little bit better off than we are. But in the places that are still like really industrialized, we see, well, you can see it in our use of military technology. We have advanced our technological abilities about 15 steps ahead of our moral development, which is a very, very serious thing. But in order to have a healthy moral grounding, you have to have the capacity for empathy and compassion and love. And so when you're wound up and pushing all the time, you lose what gives you a moral grounding, and it's all about fight or flight, kick ass or die. And so it really throws a fucking monkey wrench into the whole system. Anyhow, any thoughts you guys have in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is going back to that idea of allostatic capacity, the size of your stress bucket. If your stress bucket is small because of a lack of hormesis or just because you're chronically overtaxed, it's always going to be overflowing. Therefore, you have zero resilience. You have zero in reserve to deal with that additional stress.
I call that being fragile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Resilience is the idea of being anti-fragile and yeah, exactly. Harder to kill. Yeah. And so being in that fragile state, as you put it, like, it means that you're easily overwhelmed. You're easily going to react in very poor ways. You're not going to think things through. You're not going to have the emotional bandwidth or the spiritual bandwidth to certainly, if you can't hold space for yourself, you can't hold space for someone else.
Amen. Which, if you're a parent, that's bad news.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if you can't love yourself, then you can't love someone else. And so if you've always been gaslighting yourself and powering through and pushing through all of your emotions, your physical fatigue, everything's coming at a cost, and you'll say, I'll do this tomorrow. I'm addicted, and I'll get better tomorrow. I'll be there for them tomorrow. I'll be there for myself tomorrow. That's a dark path to be going down. Again, when the majority of people say they want to have less caffeine or no caffeine, but they're still doing it every day, that shows you how powerful that a compulsion is. Yeah.
So the way I would categorize what you're describing is that people put their life in the horizon instead of in the present.
Yes.
You can never get to the horizon. You're always pushing it forward, but you're still...
It's the eternal lie.
You're progressively dying and chasing the horizon. It's kind of a funny story. I used to train track and field athletes and distance runners, 10K runners, 5K runners, half marathoners. And there's a famous running coach from San Diego named Ted Van Arsdale who produced a lot of top runners. And I took some of my athletes for a track workout one day, and Ted Van Arsdale happened to be there doing training drills. And as I was walking to the track, I saw something very funny. He had made this device out of a hat and took what looked like a coat hanger and bent it around the hat, and it extended out about, 2 feet, and he had a carrot hanging from it. And I thought, what is he doing? Well, what he was actually doing is working with athletes to improve the efficiency of their stride so they weren't so choppy when they ran. So they were watching the carrot, and the more it jerked around, the more they needed to learn to work on their breathing and relax into their stride. But I thought it was so funny because it looked like he was training them to chase the carrot. And so it's kind of like we're talking about, everybody's pushing it's always out of reach, right? So you keep drugging and pushing, but you never get the carrot. So it just made me remember that because it was such a funny visual when I first thought of what in the world is he doing? Now, as soon as he explained it to me, it was very obvious what he was doing. But then there's the mental aspects of this. The way we're living, everything's so accelerated, and then you add caffeine to it and all these other drugs. And so as we do this, we go more and more into fight or flight, and more, as we said earlier, into left brain thinking. But we lose our capacity to see how things fit together. We lose, how is all this pushing and striving to survive ultimately going to play out in 3 years? How's my life going to look like? What's my health going to look like in 3 years? That's one of the things I do with my patients. I say, okay, if you keep going with exactly the way you're living now, I say we're going to do an imaginary crystal ball test. The crystal ball is what the psychic uses to see the future. So hold your imaginary crystal ball and say, if things don't change for 6 months, what does my life look like? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Most of them don't even get past a year. So many of them tell me, Paul, I will die before a year. If you can't figure out how to help me, I will die. Now, most of the people that come to see me have seen tons of doctors and therapists already, so they already know they're at the end of the rope. And so I think because we're losing the natural right brain capacity to see how things fit in together, to feel the wholeness of life. For example, we wouldn't be destroying all the forests and poisoning all the oceans and all the skies with chemtrails and all this other shit and poisoning our food. I say to my patients all the time, how many times have you seen a commercial for things like Roundup showing them spraying food wearing hazmat suits? Oh, everyone's seen that. Okay, then why are you eating it? And they look at me with a blank stare like, I guess I just never thought of that. Okay, well, that's what happens when you're in your left brain. You're so divided from the wholeness, you cannot see how A fits to B fits to C. So you eat poison food and then run to doctors and wonder why you've got cancer. So I think from a mental perspective, we have to, and I think using update would be an example, but to have time each day where you just sit in quiet and watch your mind, which we would call mindfulness or meditation, or just going for a walk where you don't have headphones on and you just connect to nature, or just allow yourself time to just let go of the stress of your life and give yourself an example of what I do with people clinically in my therapy is I say, look, you're spending so much time worrying, you're literally burning yourself out, because there's never a time of day when you're not producing stress reactions inside of your body. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach you how to worry a lot better. And they always look at me funny. I say, here's what we're going to do. I want you to get a Kleenex box. The next time you have a Kleenex box, it runs out of Kleenex, save it. Or take a shoe box and cut a slit in it. I want you to get a piece of paper, and I want you to write down everything it is that you're worried about. And I want you to then set a timer for 10 minutes and worry like hell. Then I want you to put that piece of paper in the box and tell yourself, I've done my worrying for today. And when you start worrying, just remind yourself that you can practice worrying tomorrow. So I call that using a worry box. So they actually concentrate their worrying, do it more professionally so they do a good job of it, but then commit themselves that they've done their worrying for the day. So now it's time to start living and leave the worry in the worry box. So you have to leave the paper in the worry box until you get there the next day, which is your symbol, I've let go of it. And when people use that practice, it can have a very therapeutic effect on them. And what happens is if they do the practice and they still keep worrying all the time, I say, okay, now what we have is an addiction. We have a repeated behavior that's not producing the results you want. So we have to look into your family history. We have to look at your relationships with your parents and where you learned this behavior. And almost always someone says, oh, yeah, it's my mom. She's a constant worrier. I say, good. How did it work out for her? Oh, she died of cancer. How did it work out for your dad? Something bad happened to him too. So now that you can actually see the pattern, we can do something with it. Shawn, you made it very clear with the studies that update radically enhances mental performance, even under stress, even under physical stress. So if we know that we have these abilities and that the caffeine is not doing it for us, most people are using the caffeine because of the way they're living. Not, in other words, the caffeine is a secondary byproduct of their inability to understand what it means to live a healthy, balanced life. I'll give you an example of something that's ridiculous, but you'll appreciate it. They built a new Olympic training center in New Zealand, and I happened to get there fairly close after when they had just opened it, because I did a lot of work in New Zealand in those years. And after I was using their gym there, and I went to the cafe to meet Penny because she was out doing some meetings or something. And so when I came to the cafe to sit down to meet Penny, there was one of those things like they hold menus in sitting on the table, and it had a bunch of flyers, and the New Zealand Olympic Committee is sponsored by Nestle. And I pulled this thing out, and it was a Nestle flyer, and this is what the first sentence was. Did you know that sugar is an important part of a well-balanced diet for any athlete? And I looked at this, and I said, well, this is absolute bullshit. I said, first of all, I've been a therapist and studying and practicing holistic nutrition for a very long time, and I've never met a single athlete in my life that knows what a balanced diet is. So there's what's called an empty signifier. Did you know that sugar is good for you if it's part of a well-balanced diet? Well, first of all, processed sugar is not good for you no matter what. And I don't know anyone that knows what a well-balanced diet is, because your need for your diet changes with your stress levels and the weather and everything else. So unless you've actually been taught how to pay attention to these things, you don't know what a well-balanced diet is. So my point being is that this is how people get railroaded and misled, and they don't really understand, but they read something like that and use it as an excuse to have more caffeine, more sugar, whatever it is. So anyhow, any thoughts you guys have on the mental aspect of all these problems?
The mental aspects of being on caffeine, I believe, is significant in terms of, if we go back to the idea of your physiology being chronically overwhelmed, your adrenals being chronically taxed, your resilience being incredibly low, your cognitive dissonance of knowing that I don't want to be on this, and it's coming at a cost, and it's addictive, that I can't be, to your point, present like I want to be. It's increasing my anxiety, my worry. It's causing me lower quality sleep. It's worsening the relationships of the people around me, because they sense I don't have resilience. They sense I am agitated or irritated with myself, and therefore agitated and irritated with them coming into my sphere. I can't hold space for myself. I can't hold space for you. People sense that. That is going to impact your relationships at work, at home. There's like such a deeper aspect of this with what caffeine is doing to us, and on a pandemic level, I would argue that it's shifted. That's the idea of like what Daniel was talking about with Michael Pollan and this kind of like caffeinated consciousness. It's shifted like who we are as a global population. There is much less play, presence, mindfulness, restorative feminine energy. And that is not just coming at a cost to the individual physiology, but the global consciousness.
Yeah, the global psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that people forget is thinking is very, very energy consumptive. One of my physiology books says that the brain uses 80% of the available blood sugar anytime it's cognitively engaged. So I think the brain's only, 1/25th of our body weight, but it's the most inefficient organ of all of them. And so, and the way I point this out to my students, I say, have you ever noticed after a test in school that you get really tired? Just sitting there for a couple of hours doing thinking can wear you out. And many great thinkers and scientists and inventors and philosophers have practically thought themselves right to death, just burn them out, like, the kind of a Friedrich Nietzsche type personality. And the other thing is if you're in a profession, or you're someone like an air traffic controller, or someone that's in charge of managing dangerous equipment, like I used to repair weapon systems on Cobra helicopters, and there's a lot of things you got to be very, very careful with, so you don't end up getting yourself or someone else killed or damaging a $11 million piece of equipment. You're using a lot of energy to do that, and there's a lot of pressure on you to do that, But if you're in an environment where you need to do a lot of thinking, but you're lacking nutrition, then once again, you're sucking all this, because you can't produce the blood sugar to run the brain without a nutritional cost. Because one of the problems that I have seen in my career, and I'm sure you're familiar with this problem, is our culture thinks of food strictly as energy, like they think of gasoline for a car, which is why people keep shopping for good deals on food instead of going to farmers and buying real food. They think calories is like we think of gasoline, so they just go shopping for less expensive energy. But to produce the energy to make your brain function well and to have a healthy cognitive capacity requires a lot of nutrition to support the process. And we keep thinking of food as only energy, but food is also information and its frequency. The color of a food, for example, tells you something about the frequency it emits as light. And so when you realize, for example, the reason a given supplement works very well for a given condition is because it's providing the body the information it needs to balance that system out. So when we keep thinking of food as strictly as energy, not information or frequency, it's kind of like we're 1/3 aware of the 2/3 of the things we need to be aware about what makes food food. And the reason that's relevant is because not only does it affect us physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, but it actually leads us to keep pushing ourselves deeper into the deficit. Because what do you do when you're in a job where you have to think? Well, you just keep doing whatever you've got to do to try to keep thinking until you can't. And that's usually when some kind of a problem begins, like people getting hurt or emotional outbursts with your boss that cost you your job, etc. So
exactly, that would result in like an injury or a disease or a car accident or all these things, and people are like, oh, right now when things are the worst, this is going to happen. Yes. That's exactly why it's happening.
That's what Murphy's Law is all about.
Well, it's you're not taking your foot off the gas, right. and you are in a fragile state. You do lack resilience. You are easier to kill. Your physiology is overwhelmed, and you've been pushing it for a long time, and now it's resulting in disease, in accidents, in stress, and it's impacting your relationships. And then, of course, there's going to be, I need a divorce, oh, you're fired, or you're in a car accident, or you have a disease. Of course. That's what's been leading up to this.
One of the things, too, in our culture, but now we've spread this all over the world. We've industrialized the Chinese, all these countries we've, infected with our go, everything. And to be an athlete takes a lot of willpower. To be a successful entrepreneur, a businessman, these things take a fair bit of willpower. You have to have the discipline to, Bob Proctor says successful people are successful because they're willing to do the things unsuccessful people won't do. And that means to have discipline. It means, have meetings at times that might be inopportune, but you have the discipline to do it so that you can make things go through. And then I've worked with countless athletes that overtrain because they actually don't think they're getting stronger unless they're training. And I have to keep telling them, no, that's when you're breaking the body down. You have to rest. So what I did is I developed a concept that I think is very relevant to our conversation. I said, willpower is the gas pedal. Won't power is the brake pedal. And what I need to work with you is developing your won't power. I won't stay up late at night watching television when I need to go to sleep. I won't keep going to the gym if I can't. I love Charlie Francis's rule. It's called the 1 to 3% rule. If you can't improve by 1 to 3% on your last workout, you don't belong in a gym. You belong stretching, in a sauna, getting a massage, mobilizing your body, doing some active rest, a different type of movement that's not stressing the primary muscles you're working with. So I'm forever having to work with people on developing won't power, but you can't get someone to effectively apply won't power if you don't have a dream bigger than their crisis. So I always have to say, okay, what is it that you're really wanting to achieve that you're willing to change for? So I have to qualify that dream goal or objective. And if it's not at least a 7 out of 10 or higher, I know that their heart's not going to get into it. So the inertia of their habits will overcome them. So that's why in the Chek system, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 approach. 1, what is your dream, goal, or objective? 2, where are you out of balance between yin and yang, the two forces that create everything? 3, there's only 3 choices you can make in relationship to any person, place, or thing: the optimal, the suboptimal, and do nothing. Do nothing has 3 derivations. Do nothing when you need to make an important decision, but you haven't got the information you need. Gather the information, then make the choice. Call a timeout if you can't stay connected to the heart with somebody that you're in conflict with, so you don't damage the relationship. So do nothing, walk away, call a timeout. And the worst application is to be apathetic, which means you don't care, and that always leads to a dead end road. And then 4 is the 4 doctors: happiness, diet, quiet, and movement, being aware of those factors of your life. So if somebody doesn't have a clear sense of why it's important for me to learn to use the brake pedal, they just won't do it, because their sense of identity and their habit patterns and their internal system of rhythms is so locked on to that target acquisition all the time, for better or worse, that they have no brake pedal. And that leads to crashes of all types. So I think part of the concept of really getting to the root of this thing is getting clear on what your dream is for yourself, for your health, for your relationships, for your business, for your finances, for the kind of the key areas of our life. And then getting clear when it's time to step on the brake pedal. Like for me, I talked about earlier, like my wives taught me how important it is, because I would keep justifying in my mind, look, as a father, as a business leader, I've got to get this done. I got to make sure the money comes in. I got to make sure the family's safe. I got to make sure we can pay the mortgage, ... That's a very male thing to do. But they would say to me, well, what do you think the ramifications of having enough money are, but having kids that feel emotionally disconnected and maybe that their father doesn't love them? And when you are flying like an arrow all the time, you often don't take time to think about these things, because either through cultural conditioning or emulating our own fathers, or being so target focused because you think that you've got to be to win, you actually never consider the ramifications until you're sitting in a counseling office or your kid's in the principal's office all the time and they've got a behavioral problem. And I think you guys would agree that all this boils down to a spiritual crisis.
Yeah.
Right? That's the root of it, right? Hi, everybody. This is Paul Chek. I come to give you a little message. I want to share some empathy. I know how hard it is to change your behavior when you got some bad diet and lifestyle habits, and you look at that coffee, or you look at the sugar, or you look at the junk food that you're in love with, and you reach for it because it's quick and easy, and you keep telling yourself, I need to change, I need to change, I need to change. But eventually the system breaks down and you get motivated by the pain teacher. But what if I gave you an opportunity to try something that would help you start the process of behavior change and enjoy it and look forward to it? Well, I have something for you. It's Organifi's red juice. It tastes great, and it's loaded with nutrition and lots of vitality for you. And I got Drew Canoli here to tell us why it works so well for behavior change and increasing your life force and your vitality. Drew, what's the magic in that red juice? Because everybody seems to love it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. Sometimes when we're craving things, it's hard to switch a habit, a behavior.
Yeah.
So I looked at that fundamental fact and I'm like, well, what could we create that people could crave that actually tasted great?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when red juice was born, for
Good.
energy. So between the berries, the blueberries, the raspberries, the strawberries,
Yes.
the best quality organic glyphosate residue free,
Yes.
the rhodiola and the cordyceps,
Yes.
we were onto something. We sweetened it with a dash of monk fruit.
Mm.
And literally, I started to come to life when I drank this. I had so much more energy than I would normally have. Stamina went through the roof.
Yeah.
I actually shaved off 45 seconds off my mile time drinking red juice before I ran.
Wow.
Talk about an uptick in nitric oxide production in your body, right?
Something went up.
Yeah.
We know speed
Actually,
went up.
it's funny you say that, because I get messages all the time about sexy time.
Oh,
And
yeah?
when people drink red juice, they're
Something's
like,
going up.
something's going up. And I get so many messages about that. That's funny you brought that up.
Well, we hope it's the flag these days.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're looking for more energy and stamina and something that tastes great to where you could shift your cravings,
Yes.
keeping your hunger and your energy in check,
And feel good about it.
and feel good about it.
And you might even break down a little bit and wander back. But if you've got some natural sweetness and a lot of nutrition, you probably, if you're honest with yourself, won't need as many chips or as many of whatever your little thing is.
Yep.
But you can do this naturally and easily. And that's what I'm all about, naturally and easily and honestly. And, you know, it all starts with being honest with yourself. So if you want a great tasting behavioral switch technique that's really good for you, it has a lot of knock-on benefits for you and your whole family, try red juice. Go to Organifi.com, Organifi.com. And because I love you, Living 4D listeners, so much, I've organized for you to get a 20% discount with the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. And that's as fast as I can say that. I love you guys. Enjoy your red juice. For me, I define spirituality as connecting to a progressively expanding whole. So, if I connect to myself, that's I. If I connect to you guys, that's we. But if I can connect to the wants, feelings, and needs of others, or the needs of nature, or the needs of the world, now my sense of self has grown to the all. So if we get too driven and we get too narrow focused and we're too buzzed and we're pushing too hard, we get caught in I consciousness and we lose our we. Like we damage our own family relationships, and then our connection, what we're putting into the all, is more of that. And when you have billions of people around the world living like that, then we can sit and watch wars on television like we're watching movies and not have empathy and compassion for the fact that we're all annihilating each other and we're supposed to be intelligent. If we look at this from a spiritual perspective, and I think this is why the plant medicines are so important, because most of them, ayahuasca, mushrooms, marijuana can have a feminine component, but the ayahuasca and the mushrooms I find much more feminine. LSD, San Pedro, they can be quite yang in their expression as a comparison. I think DMT can be either yin or yang depending on the psychological state of the individual. But the general experience that I have from plant medicine ceremonies is it activates my feminine nature a lot more. And it brings my right brain on a lot more. And as you know, I don't know how many plant medicine journeys you've done, but you would know one of the first things that happens when you get into a real ceremony is that you immediately become aware of all your own shortcomings and inadequacies, and where you're not being apologetic and you should be, where you're not being loving and who you're not being loving to. I mean, the medicines kind of give you the same sort of past life review people report from NDEs. Yeah. You get to go through a mini NDE, and it really helps you look at yourself from a more holistic spiritual perspective, and it gives you a chance to make changes. But the problem is when people do these plant medicines and they don't have someone skilled to guide them through an integration process, they sit there and cry for 2 hours, and then they go home and do the same shit. And 100 journeys later, they're still doing the same stuff and thinking they need another journey, which is, one of the things that concerns me a lot about the legalization of all this stuff, because pretty soon it goes from being a container for healing and a spiritual practice to just another drug to numb you so that you don't have to confront the reality of your life.
Yeah, I would argue that in some ways it could do more harm than good for the reason that you're talking about. Like if you become acutely aware of some of these counterproductive behaviors and they come up from unconscious, subconscious to conscious mind, but then you go back to living your life as you were, but now they're clearly in your forebrain, clearly conscious, and you're still not rectifying it, then that can be some serious dissonance, and that will show up as disease, as sickness, as pain.
Yes, and I think if I had to find two words that underlie everything that we've been talking about, the first one is sacred. The second one is ritual. Like I pray for everything that enters my body. I connect to it and give it thanks. Because to me, there's nothing here but God. I believe if God is real, then God is the source of everything. So everything is of God. So there's no need to look for God. You're wearing it, you're talking to it, you're driving it, you're sitting on it, you're pooping it out, you're peeing it out, you're breathing it, you're eating it. That's God. Or there is no God. What's the point of God? If God is God, God means prime source. So I think when we lose connection, when we have a religious conception of God in the sky that's disconnected from everything, and God is perfect, and God you can't get to, you need Jesus or some other mediator to get to God, then we can become trapped in this idea of that we're fallen beings and that we're being punished, and the body's sinful, the earth is a place where you get punished, toil in the thorns for many generations because of your sins. So we end up losing a sense of sacredness in life. But that's all brainwashing. That's all somebody else's idea. I tell people, look, if you just sit and ask yourself, what would life be like if all the vegetables could get up and run from you, and you couldn't catch the animals to eat? You would starve to death, and you would realize that they're sacrificing their lives for you, and then they would become sacred to you. And all the native tribes and societies had rituals where they asked for the spirits of the plants and the animals for support. They shaman connected to the spirits of the buffalo or the deer or the elk, etc. The Eskimos to the creatures that they ate and asked for support and gave sacrifices in return. And so I think we've lost connection with what is sacred, which turns out to be everything. And when things are sacred, you don't waste them. You don't just pass out drugs like candy everywhere at a rock concert. You go into a sacred ceremony. Otherwise, you legalize everything, and now you just got a bunch of stoned people that have lost touch with the sacredness of life. And then the other thing is the ritual. David Bohm said no man can do deep thinking without a healthy ritual. And I agree 100%, because deep thinking is very demanding on the mind and the body. And if you don't have a healthy ritual, you don't have a way to sustain and support your ability to keep the body well enough nourished and to be resilient enough to do the work of deep thinking. And I think when we look at what a healthy ritual is, like it's very important for me to kiss my kids and love them in the morning. It's very important for me now that I've learned how to do it, to eat dinner with my kids and to spend time whenever I can interacting and helping Mono with his go-kart, and all the things that parents should do, but we're often too busy to do. I mean, how many people raise their children on televisions and iPads now, and they don't really get any human interaction? So when we say, okay, what would be important to have in a sacred ritual? That's why I have 4 doctors. You have to have clarity on what is happy making for you. That's why I stack rocks. That's why I paint. That's why I have a gym. That's why I like to go hiking. That's why I like to go bowling with the family. That's why I have drums and rattles all over the place, so we can make music for even 5 or 10 minutes can change your day. I don't know if you heard, my daughter was playing the drum in here this morning. I'm like, hey, don't do that. Shawn's asleep, but she loves to come play the drums. So Dr. Happy says, what is happy making for me? And then knowing I must ritualize this so that I don't need a drug to make me happy. Then we've got movement. We need to ritualize getting enough movement to keep our body healthy. We have animal bodies. They need movement. And if we don't ritualize it, all of a sudden we've made excuses for a month, and the next thing you know, our body's falling apart, we're overweight or we're unhealthy. And then we have Dr. Diet. We have to ritualize eating. So many of the people that I work with have serious problems with digestion, serious problems with toxicity, because they eat so damn fast they don't even chase their food. You could feed them broken glass and they probably wouldn't notice the difference between that and steak, because they're staring at an iPhone or doing a business meeting while they're eating, and they've just got no connection to the food and no sense of gratitude or worship, right? And every one of those things, if it's real food, has lost its life to give us life. And I think that's how it becomes sacred. And then Dr. Quiet not only means sleep, but it means taking time each day to be in yourself and with yourself, and to reflect on your day and ask yourself, how did I do today? Where could I live a little more fully and love a little more fully? And what am I willing to do that tomorrow? So when it comes to what I would call a sacred ritual, if we don't have a happiness, a movement, a diet, and a quiet practice, then we can leave a hole too big. I tell my students there's no such thing as a wholesome 3-doctor person. You can be happy making and moving your body and eating, but if you're not getting enough sleep or spending enough time in yourself, you leave too big of a hole. In other words, no matter which combination of those 3 you do, the gaping hole of the missing 4th is enough to lead to an imbalance that will put you in someone's doctor's office or psychiatrist or psychologist's office. And I think we all need to be aware that a living philosophy has to have those 4 components, or we will keep drinking ourselves into death with caffeine and drugging ourselves and warring ourselves and biohacking ourselves into oblivion. So if you have anything to add to that, please do.
I mean, just on top of that, the only thing I would say is being kind to yourself.
Yeah, that's part of
if
the quiet.
If anyone talked to you like you talk to you, you wouldn't be their friend.
That's so funny. It's true, though.
So
I mean, it's bad funny.
Yeah, just being kinder to yourself is going to be a path towards centeredness, is going to be a path towards you loving yourself, and then, again, holding space for yourself, and then allowing that space and love for others around you.
Huston Smith was considered to be the world's greatest expert on world religion. I've got all his books. I've studied them all. He's an amazing, amazing man. He was friends with Ram Dass, Timothy Leary. He did a lot of pioneering research. In fact, his research paper published in the Journal of Philosophy, I believe, in 1961, called "Do Drugs Have Religious Import?", which was scientifically, or he did a study to look at this. Can you have a religious experience on psychedelic drugs? Because all the religious people said, no, you can't. That's not spiritual. So he did a research paper. I'll tell you what he did because it's quite interesting. He disagreed, and he's one. By the way, he's the only person I know of in the world that spent 5 years living with the people and practicing each of the world's major religions. So he devoted himself to being a Muslim for 5 years, to practicing the Jewish religion for 5 years, Christianity. So he literally traveled around the world and did these in 5-year blocks. So he could really deeply understand each of these religions. And that's what made him so unique, is he had the practical experience and the depth of the culture, the people, and the practices of each of these world religions. So he met with many bishops and clergy, and they, he said, do you think you can have a legitimate religious experience using what we call today plant medicines, which they called then entheogens or psychedelics? And they all said, no, that's not a religious. So he said, well, okay, let's do a study. So he got them to go to their flocks and have them write down the experiences they had when they were having what they called a legitimate religious experience, what Jung would call a numinous experience. And then he went to people using LSD and mushrooms and all that stuff and said, write down the experience that you had when you were having a religious experience because of the use of this drug. And then what he did is he had his secretary type them all up, but he removed the names and he took any mention of the drug out. And then he coded them so only he knew who was who, and he gave copies of them to all the religious higher-ups, and they could not discern the drug people from the religious people at all. There was no way they could identify them, so he proved there is no difference. A religious experience is a religious experience, no matter how it happens. So anyhow, the reason I was bringing Huston Smith up, because I think he was 103 when he died, which was maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. in the last interview with him, I got to watch the last interview, the guy said, well, listen, Houston, you're getting along in years now. It's, your time's coming to an end. Is there any message you have for people? And he said, yes, be a little kinder. Be a little kinder to yourself. Be a little kinder to everybody else. That was his parting message, which was what you just said. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So you're right. Be a little kinder. So great journey, guys.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed the dialogue, and I love all these studies and all the work you guys have done. And Daniel, your inspiration to create something better. I think that's where it all comes from, right? Our desire to create something better, not only for ourselves, but for other people. And I'm grateful that Cal Callahan turned me on to this, although it seems like the universe wanted me to know, because I got hit with update 3 times in a row in 1 week. Yeah. And any final comments you guys want to share? And then the other issue we've been talking about, updates really only available in the United States unless someone wants to spend the exorbitant fees to ship it and pay the customs fees on it.
Yes, it turns out it's expensive to ship water across water.
Yes. But the other thing is, for any of you listening, any of you that have the means and might be interested in starting a distribution, reach out to...
Yeah, you can reach out to me, daniel@drinkupdate.com.
Daniel@drinkupdate.com.
That's just my email address. I think, on the assumption you want to purchase or be involved in distributing to a different country.
Are you guys looking for investors, or are you beyond that?
Look, I think we're kind of beyond that for the most part, fortunately. That being said, some of our best investors have been customers of ours, but we take it on a case-by-case basis. Okay. We're fortunate that we don't need the cash. And
where can people buy Update?
Directly on our website at drinkupdate.com, and you're kindly giving them 25% off.
Oh yeah, 25% for Spirit Gym listeners. Look at that, you guys.
There you go. So if you use the code Chek25, CHEK25 at checkout, you'll save 25%.
And the website again?
The website is drinkupdate.com.
Oh, simple, drinkupdate.com.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we're slowly expanding into more and more retailers, across the country. Right now, primarily our retailers exist in New York, LA, and Texas. But come February, we'll be nationwide at the Vitamin Shop, which will be really exciting. And then, of course, we also sell on Amazon.
Well, you got to get it into all the gas stations and 7-Elevens. And
we're getting there. Well,
yeah, it's a big job.
Baby steps.
Well, I will close the podcast, you guys, by just saying thank you for pursuing this and doing the work to find Shawn. And Shawn, thank you for devoting yourself to your own healing and to deepening your investigations into the deeper understanding of these molecules and how we can use these things intelligently to enhance our ability to live and love more fully and have a better life instead of just a faster life, or instead of being hopped up. I like the idea of the update, because the update's always supposed to be better, right? We update to get better, not just to repeat the same mistakes again. So, and thank you to my sponsors. You guys are amazing. And anything you buy from the sponsors is not only supporting you and a little commission going to the podcast to keep the podcast going, but you're putting the money in the hands of farmers that are organic, biodynamic, regenerative farmers. And so anything you buy from my sponsors is actually making the world a better place and going into the hands of people that care about you and care about the world. I've ran this entire podcast without a break, as I normally do. So the members, you're very fortunate, because Daniel and Shawn have agreed to do a 1-hour Q&A for any of the podcast members. If you're not a member and you would like access to geniuses like Daniel and Shawn, which we often do to share with you the chance to mingle with these amazing people, you can go to paulchek.com, and there you can become a member of the podcast, which is actually quite cheap. It's only $7.90-something a month, so you get either the chance to meet with 4 groups of amazing people, be it single or multiple individuals, or you get the chance to have the extended play, which, as many of you know, can be an hour to 2 hours more. So lots of love. Thank you guys once again.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see Update spread around the world, and I'm looking forward to sharing with it as many people as I can. So lots of love, guys.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guests, Daniel Solomons and Shawn Wells. If you'd like to try Update for yourself, Daniel and Shawn are giving Paul's listeners a 25% discount. Go to drinkupdate.com/Chek25 and use the promo code Chek25. That's drinkupdate.com/CHEK25. Daniel and Shawn will be holding a live Q&A session exclusively for members of Paul's Spirit Gym podcast membership. If you'd like to take part in this opportunity, you can subscribe by going to paulchek.com/podcast. With your membership, you also get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul and other guests, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community, where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. So go to paulchek.com/podcast and join the Spirit Gym podcast membership today. Connect with Update's growing community on Instagram, X, Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Drink Update. You can also find Shawn online at shawnwells.com or his website for formulations, zonehalo.com. Check the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast for links to Shawn's and Dan's personal social media accounts. You'll also find details on the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.